All right, what's going on? Drive time Thursday afternoon, 10 minutes past the hour, 2 o'clock. We got some sunshine and some warm temperatures today on this Thursday afternoon. A little bit of a calm before the storm. Going to be really cold this weekend with some potential snow coming up either in the benches, certainly in the mountains on Saturday and potentially on Sunday as well. Cold weather into the beginning of next week, but it is 40 degrees and sunny as we talk to you today during the 2 o'clock hour on this Thursday afternoon. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic, hosting the program today. That's Porter Larson behind the glass, doing a great job booking a good show, and we have a lot to do. On this Thursday afternoon, inching closer and closer to the weekend, inching closer and closer to a weekend in professional football where most people believe it is the best playoff weekend. Couple of games on Saturday to start the divisional round. Texans and the Chiefs live at Arrowhead. That line is KC -8. Detroit is getting 9.5 at home against the Commanders, so Vegas thinks a couple of games on Saturday that will not be all that close. Sunday's tilt is the Rams and the Eagles. Lincoln Financial in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philly's getting 6 points. That line is down just a little bit. And then the game that everybody is excited about on Sunday afternoon, it is the Ravens and the Bills. Baltimore is a 1-point favorite. That line has not moved at all in 4 days now since lines were kind of set. So we'll get some pro football on the show today. Had a good time last night at an event I emceed where one of the speakers, I suppose, who I interviewed to speak to the group was one Rick Neuheisel. Rick is going to join the show coming up on Monday. Rick is now with CBS, did a lot of Pac-12 stuff for a number of different years. May that conference rest in peace. Of course, high-level quarterback, walk-on once upon a time that played a little pro football, and a Rose Bowl winning coach. And I thought Rick's comments last night to this group about the future of college football were really interesting. I'm going to unpack some of those on the show today, and then we'll bring Rick in on Monday to kind of give us his take. I don't know that I agree with him entirely, but he's a smart guy that understands the landscape and the future of private equity and college football and college athletics and what it could mean. It is on its way. But is there a way to essentially maintain the structure that allows all teams, including G5 teams, including teams that aren't in the Big 10, Big 12, SEC, ACC, et cetera, to maintain their place in the ecosystem of college football? I'm not so sure. Rick disagrees. So from a college football standpoint, some interesting things that was shared last night by Rick Neuheisel. Heather Dinich wrote a piece today for ESPN on what she's hearing about the changes to the CFP that could happen as soon as next year. So, of course, we will do a little college football on the show today. Utah Jazz had a pretty entertaining game last night, at least over the first three quarters. And then the Charlotte Hornets, who are not a very good basketball team, just ran away from the Jazz in the fourth, outscoring them 37-25. Our guy Mark Williams with a career-high 31 points and 13 boards. Are you saying to yourself, who is Mark Williams? Yeah, probably. He played at Duke, didn't play much in college, but he's a big body who posted a career high last night. Jazz had Keontae George back in the lineup. There was no Colin Sexton, no Larry Markkinen. Micah Potter got the start, so did Cody Williams. Walker had a decent first few quarters, but Mark Williams kind of took him to task. But it's good to see Keontae back on the floor, and they played him in the starting lineup next to Isaiah Collier. Some thoughts on that on the program today that we'll get into. The Utah Hockey Club welcome in the New York Rangers tonight, which is hilarious and awesome. Utah Hockey Club badly in need of a win. It has been a rough stretch for them, just like it's been a rough stretch for the Utah Jazz. Gordon Monson from the Salt Lake Tribune, who will join us on the show today with, I don't know if I want to say a scathing piece, but he wrote about the Delta Center and how once upon a time it was a fortress where teams won games, and that's not what's happening as of late with either the Jazz or the Hockey Club. Fans continue to show up. Which is always a good thing. We are a market that is known for our very passionate, intense sports fans. So I thought Gordon did a good job today with his piece. We're going to bring him on to talk about it. And how about the Utah Utes, man? How about the Utah men's basketball team? 2 straight wins now in Big 12 play. after trouncing Oklahoma State. They went on the road last night at Fort Worth, and they got a win over TCU, a TCU team that beat BYU. TCU's not great. They were picked close to the bottom of the conference. But I think we've all just been waiting for some positive signs, and I think we saw it last night. Keanu Dawes came off the bench and had a really good game. And Utah didn't shoot it very well. Gabe went 2 of 11 from 3. Utah goes 6 of 21. But that was a Craig Smith win. Watching Craig's teams at Utah State, and, really more often than not, this Utah Utes team under Craig, they do play the way their head coach wants them to play. The question is, do they have the talent, do they have the skill to stack up with their Big 12 competitors game in and game out? Their next chance to prove that is Brigham Young coming up on Saturday, 7 o'clock at the Huntsman Center. It is a readout, and hopefully with a couple of wins, we'll see a good crowd on Saturday. So, a lot to do on the program today. College football, pro football, college basketball, pro basketball. Latest with the RSL roster construction and tear down. About a month prior to their CONCACAF tilt, they got a lot of work to do to make sure they're ready to go. We had Kurt Schmidt on the show yesterday, so we'll get to as much of that as we possibly can. Right out of the gates, the offensive coordinator for the University of Utah football program, Jason Beck, stops by. I have not had an opportunity to interview Jason one-on-one. We heard from him in media availability this week with Coach Witt and Morgan Scally, so excited to get to know Jason a little bit today. Christopher Comradi is already here live in studio with a lovely-looking Flo. CK, our guy, will be stopping by. He's going to give RSL fans some hope, I think. So we'll get with CK today. Gordon Monson, typically live in studio, but when Craig Bolerjack doesn't come in, Gordon uses that as an excuse to stay home and eat some soup. So he's going to hop on over the phone today. The aforementioned Craig Bolerjack, who's on the road with the Jazz, will stop by at 4. Do a little sports court on the program as well. So Jason Beck, Chris Comradi, Gordon Monson, Craig Bolerjack, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, and that guy, Porter Larson, producing the show on a Thursday. So Utah basketball silencing the haters.
You don't say. 2 in a row?
2 in a row. And look, the great thing about college hoops is you never know. That's why March Madness is awesome. And I suppose we should feel a little bit better about Saturday's game against BYU today than we have over the past few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, they're tied currently in conference play, right smack dab in the middle of the Big 12 and going into a matchup, the Hardwood Holy War, if you will, on Saturday.
Wow, nice.
And, I mean, you have to feel more confident than you did 2-3 weeks ago, not only because of how Utah's playing, but because of how BYU's been playing as well.
Yeah, and Craig has won everywhere he's been. This is not a guy that suddenly forgot how to coach. So I'm very happy for them for getting another Big 12 win. All right, Jason Beck's going to be our first guest right out of the gates before we bring in our guy CK on a Thursday. But before we get to Jason, courtesy of our good friends at Standard Restaurant Supply, check out their convenient location here in Salt Lake City or online at standardrestaurantsupply.com. On a Thursday, it's time now for your opening tip. Gordon Monson, who's going to join us coming up in a bit. Occasionally Gordon will polish off the fastball, right? And he's been writing and covering sports for, 40, 45 years. And Gordon today, obviously that's my radio partner of 7 years back in the day, so I try to keep track of what he's writing. And today he dialed it up a little bit. He maybe still has 90, 95 mph in the old bag. So he wrote a piece on the Delta Center, and the headline, which Gordon does not write, the once proud Delta Center is now haunted, plagued by the ghost and ghouls of losing. It's a perfect, Monson piece. Utah Jazz Hockey Club have combined to win 9 games at home so far this year. Jazz have the worst home winning percentage in the NBA. Utah Hockey Club has the worst home win percentage in the NHL with just 6 wins. And, go to sltriv.com. We always encourage you to support our good friends over the Tribune and Aaron Falk and Gordon Monson and our guy Andy Larson. And you can, go through it. And depending on your age, if you're a sports fan in this market, longtime sports fan, in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, certainly, obviously depending on when you moved here, when you started to pay attention, you remember when back in the day, Delta Center felt like every time you went there, it was kind of a foregone conclusion that the Jazz were going to win. They had one of the best home court advantages in all of pro basketball for a myriad of different reasons. Loud fans, misbehaving fans, intimidating fans that say things that aren't necessarily great from time to time. I'll just kind of leave that there. And year in and year out, oftentimes, as Gordon points out in his piece, NBA players would be polled, what's the hardest place to play? Where's the hardest place to play in pro basketball? And oftentimes the Jazz would be mentioned, Delta Center would be mentioned as the toughest place to play in all of pro basketball. So home records of 36-5, 33-8, 34-7, 37-4, 38-3. And back in 2021, this was Quinn, Gobert, Mitchell, that group, 31-5 at home. All-time record, 1,376 wins, 657 losses. And that includes some games played at the Salt Palace and such way back in the day. But this place has been known as a spot in a building in a market that's really, really difficult to play. Now, the Jazz are 3-14 at home. And the problem with trying to really dig into this layer by layer is we all understand what time it is. We all understand what Justin Zanuck and Danny Ainge have decided to do. We've debated whether or not it was the right move, and only time will tell. From a sports talk radio standpoint, you can't crack the mic and say, hey, we'll talk about the Jazz in 3 years when this long game project has unfolded. You can't do that, so you kind of have to analyze what's in front of you. And I think it is fair to say that over the past 5-6 weeks, the Jazz have been competitive, they've been better, and they are improving. Now, the problem is you don't see the improvement in the win-loss column. You just don't. And so if you're not watching games night in and night out, and I don't blame you because it's not all that exciting, you don't see, the actual proof if you're just checking box scores and looking at the standings. Because the wins haven't come at a very high level. They typically will surprise a team from time to time. They beat a Miami Heat team that's in flux. They beat an Orlando Magic team that's without 4 of their best players. They beat a Brooklyn Nets team that's also trying to rebuild the way they are. But as we've outlined this week with all of our NBA guests, the Jazz have 13 first-round picks coming their way over the next 7 years. And I hate to say it, but that's probably going to be the avenue that they're going to have to follow in order to get talent. And every time they add a younger piece and they elect to move on from a veteran piece, it kind of resets the clock a little bit, and we're all kind of wondering when this team is going to be good again. And I'm not here to place blame or anything like that. I mean, Ryan Smith bought the team in the middle of I guess I'll say at the tail end of the Quinn Snyder, Gobert, Mitchell years. And as soon as Ryan bought the team, even though he said it wasn't his plan to make wholesale changes, he did. And the building felt different. The staff was overturned. Quinn decided he didn't want to work here anymore. Dennis Lindsay had one meeting with ownership and was like, peace. And, they elected to move on from a team that was pretty young and pretty good. It was a bold move, and it has not paid off as of yet. But, of course, I'm not going to sit here to anoint or dismiss what they're trying to do this year. But Gordon's piece is well taken, and he's not wrong. I mean, this is a building that no longer feels like a fortress. The fans are attending, and there are nights occasionally when there's a close game down the stretch where you feel kind of like the energy and the noise of the old Delta Center, but consistently, it's not the way it used to be. And ultimately, things change. You move on. Whether it's progress or not, only time will tell. And I'm not here to harken back to the 90s every time we do a radio show. But I do think there is a healthy amount of skepticism in this market about whether or not this ownership group and this front office can build the Jazz back up to being a contender the way that we're kind of used to seeing them. Now, the fact of the matter is they probably have not had a champion, like a true championship level team since 1998. All due respect to Darren and Booz and Memo and Mitchell and Gobert and that group. I just never thought either of those teams were in the mix to win an NBA championship. And certainly this team is not even close to being competitive for a play-in scenario. And that is part of the plan. Only time will tell if they can get it right. But we're going to bring in Gordon today. I'm going to talk to him about this. We'll get CK's take as well. But we'll catch a quick break because coming up on the other side, first time I've had the opportunity to interview the offensive coordinator for the Utes. He is Jason Beck right here on ESPN 700. We got Christopher Kamrani live in studio today. We'll do a little football, a little RSL. Gordon Monson stops by from the Salt Lake Tribune. Craig Bowler-Jack, voice of the Utah Jazz later on. But let's start off with a very special guest. My first opportunity to interview the new offensive coordinator for the University of Utah. He is Jason Beck on a Thursday afternoon. Jason, how are you? Thanks for the time.
I'm doing great, Spence. Thank you. No problem.
Well, congratulations on the new job, first and foremost. Here's my first question right out of the gates. Kyle Whittingham, Bronco Mendenhall, what makes them similar? What makes them different?
Both defensive guys, both have a certain culture, toughness, grit that they want in their players and they develop in their players. Obviously, being on different sides of the rivalry, that's brought out a different competitiveness in each of them in their relationship. But they're very different. And obviously, I'm just getting to know Coach Witt a little bit, but Bronco's a little more introverted, and Coach Witt's a little easier to, talk with as I've been out on the road with him. And looking forward to finding that out more, though, as we keep going.
Jason, the list of coaches that I can ask that question to is very, very short. Like you're right? There are very few coaches that have experience with both.
That's true, but maybe more than you think. I'm not sure, as you dive into it.
Well, and that's one of the unique things about this Utah-BYU rivalry is, the cross-pollination between coaching staffs, and wanted to get your take on that because from the outside looking in, fans like to stoke the fire of, and of course, whoever you support, wherever you went to school, that's going to be how you lean. But how would you describe what I perceive to be a very unique dynamic? You can look across the landscape of college football and maybe one coach from Bama ends up at Auburn or something like that. But the list of coaches on both sides that have experience with the other is pretty stunning. And it makes this rivalry, Jason, kind of one of one.
Yeah, that is pretty unique and pretty interesting. And it's great to be a part of because I've been at other schools like Syracuse, where they kind of have a rival, but it's not really. Their rival's Boston College, and they kind of have a thing with Pitt. But it's not near that same, spirit of the rivalry that you experience here in Utah, which is great to be a part of. And so, that is unique for both those programs and kind of that coaches on each side of it.
So, Jason, I know you've been asked this, but this is my first opportunity to have you on this show and interview you one-on-one. And according to reports, you were a candidate for several jobs, several schools to call plays and be the offensive coordinator. What landed you on Salt Lake City? What landed you on the University of Utah? What were the elements that made you accept this job and say no to the others?
Yeah, I was kind of up for a couple different P4 jobs. And, Utah is a great program with a great history and a lot of success. And so it's a situation where you look at it and you feel like you have every opportunity to be at the top of that conference and to have a lot of success. And to be a part of a program like that was a great opportunity. Utah's a great state to live in. So for my family and I, that's a great opportunity to move here and live in the communities here because it's a great place to raise your family. And the stability with Coach Witt and heading into Coach Scally is a great, opportunity for a coach that you're looking for and to find in a program that you're choosing.
Let's get a little peek behind the curtain about the interview process. I'm curious, and obviously, keep to yourself what you need to, and that's part of the deal when you're talking behind closed doors to peers and coaches and people you're going to work with and work for. But what were some of the questions that were posed to you by Coach Witt and maybe Coach Scally, and how did you sell your vision to them that ultimately landed in this partnership?
I knew there was some interest from Utah through the process early on, mainly coming from third parties, kind of other people just reaching out to gauge interest, that kind of thing. There wasn't a lot of necessarily interview, sit down, question, answer, interview type of thing as maybe some of the other jobs. But there was a deep dive into watching the film of, what I was doing offensively in the scheme. And so you could tell there was a lot of knowledge about what I was doing offensively and why they had interest that way. That was more unique to the process. So, yeah, I could tell there'd been between Witt, Scally, and other people around the program, man, they'd watched a lot of film on me, and I'm assuming several other coordinators that they were looking at, and kind of let, I guess, that be the resume much more than what you had to say in an interview type setting.
So for our Ute fan listeners who are not familiar with Jason Beck and his offensive ethos and his belief in how offensive football should be played, how much of it is simply your system and how much of it is simply, all right, let me see what sort of talent I have at my disposal, then we're going to cater a game plan around that?
It is very much personnel driven. Cater the game plan to your best players, starting with the quarterback. Next, what the O-line can do. And then lastly, kind of all the other skill players you're putting around that. And so every year it has been different. Some years you're throwing it for a lot. Some years you're rushing it for more. It's very much catered and built around the personnel.
Tell me, when it comes to, obviously you haven't been on the ground for that long, but there have been so many things that have happened since you have been hired. What sort of role, Jason, have you had in, say, the re-recruitment of Isaac Wilson? And obviously your former New Mexico quarterback is now on campus here with Devin Dampier, and you're the offensive coordinator, so of course you have a seat at the table, but was it drinking through a fire hose when you landed? Were there a lot of things that you kind of had to jump right into when it came to the reacquisition and then acquisition of some of the kids that are going to be playing for Utah football next year?
Yeah, with the landscape of college football now, this coordinator hire needs to happen pretty fast before that portal opens, or ideally it happens before that portal opens, so you're heavily involved with that, both in retaining, in attracting players, and identifying, the pieces you want for what you're doing. So like talking about Isaac, when it was coming up and it was rumored Devin might be coming, there was some concern there, that led to going in the portal. And so, yeah, it was absolutely a recruiting to keep Isaac here. Because when I watch him, he has a lot of talent and a lot of ability. And, my background developing quarterbacks and helping quarterback play, I thought would be a strong attraction. And so I wanted to keep him here. And there's a lot of people around the program that helped with that and that were involved with that, but that was some of the first stuff I was doing. And so fortunate, man, they have all the old line coming back. And with Coach Harding and the great job he's done here, that was pretty solid. And then everything else was kind of had to be addressed through keeping players and through getting players through the portal.
Is the plan that Devin's the starter? Certainly feels that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely with the history and the background and the interest and the commitment to all that, that's for Devin not to come in and be in the up front getting reps, that just makes sense. And my job is to develop and coach all of those guys in the room and develop all those guys. And because everybody, anybody's a play away. Anybody's a play away. So you got to be developing the whole room. But nothing's just handed to you. You got to still earn it, improve it, and show it all the time. But Devin has a head start. He knows the offense. He knows the verbiage. He knows, how that all works. And so he's coming in that position while everybody else is competing for the opportunities behind that. And like we told everybody, I mean, if somebody's clearly outplaying somebody else, the best guy's going to play. I'm not coaching my son in Pee Wee football, and so. But Devin's in an advantage with everything, and he's a really talented player, which is why we wanted to get him here.
Well, Jason, if the last 2 years are any indicator, you need to be 5 deep at the quarterback position for the Utes. Unfortunately, that's been what has transpired because of the lack of the health. So besides Devin and besides Isaac, how's that room looking right now, and are you looking to add to it?
Yeah, right now we're full in the room. We brought in a couple other transfers. Of course, you guys know Nate. He was here previously, and he's back. And so he'll be doing some stuff in the QB room, but kind of also seeing what else he can add to the offense. Brendan transferred in from Oklahoma, so he's in that room working. A couple high school kids that were signed by the previous staff with Bird and Wyatt are here. They're on campus, so they're starting to wrap their heads around college football and what that's like and what those expectations are. And then we got a couple good walk-ons to the program, and Drew and Dallin that are also a part of that mix. So yeah, right now there's 7 guys that we're developing and working with for that reason that you're talking about. Now, hopefully we don't hit that. Hopefully we don't see 5 quarterbacks, but that is the reality. You're coaching everybody up, developing everybody, and I lived in that world as a player, just being a play away as primarily a backup in my time.
Before I say you lose Jason, as a child of a former sports executive that moved a bunch of different times, where my dad changed jobs, the most important thing: how's the wife, how the kids, how they handling the adjustment?
Well, they haven't moved yet. We're still in the process of doing all that. But, they've been a part of this thing quite a few times. As the kids get older, that brings different challenges with it. But my wife's amazing, and she's been in this thing the whole time. We got married in college, so she's been along for this ride the entire time, and she's amazing. The kids are great. It has its pros and cons, as you know. And so you just try to focus on the best parts of it and make the most of all those things.
Well, Jason, we'll finish where we started. Congratulations on the opportunity, and I appreciate the time. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, Spence. Good to visit with you.
All right, Jason Beck, the new offensive coordinator for the University of Utah. We'll catch a break. Chris Comrani's live in studio. We'll do a big segment with CK coming up next right here on ESPN 700. There's a lot to do today with my next guest. If you're not watching on YouTube, dial it up. I wonder how many YouTube viewers we have as of. I don't even pull it up anymore because in the wintertime, I just wear the same thing every day.
The red light's on, Spence.
The red light is on. As of now, we have 5 watching. Christopher Camerani live in studio. How many can we get over the next 40 minutes?
Can we get to 10? Can we get to 10?
Let's see if we can get to double digits right now. CK just gave a double thumbs up to the camera on YouTube.
I wear my sunglasses inside.
Do you want me to drop the Larry David line?
Oh, yeah.
Sunglasses inside. It's one of two people, either blind, either blind people or a-holes.
Yeah.
What are you?
The latter.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
You are?
Yeah.
Oh, I push back on that. But all right. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me.
Jason Beck, offensive coordinator, Utah football.
Nate Johnson is back in the room.
I didn't know that. I thought they were going to bring Nate in to do some other things, but he's part of the quarterback room.
Sounds like that's going to be the plan. I mean, if you're looking historically, Utah's always had the ability to have a player on the roster do several different things. Not a Travis Hunter type, but Eric Weddle was a hell of a two-way player.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Asiata. The list goes on. So I would be shocked if Nate is a full-time quarterback, like the fastest dude on the team automatically. So Jason should find a way to get him the ball in space, as they say.
And he all but said Devin Dampier is the starting quarterback. That's not breaking
Good on
news.
him, though, right?
Yeah,
like,
for
can
sure,
we
yeah.
can we like give a round of applause for this dude?
Yes, absolutely.
Breaking news on the drive, putting all these theoretical, blogosphere type conversations to bed immediately on January 16th. Happy Thursday.
Yeah, and we don't have to wait for months and months and months to find out who it is. I just hadn't heard him asked directly yet, so I figured just why not, to see what he would say. Now, he left room, of course. Do you still feel like there's a healthy future contingency plan in place for Isaac Wilson?
Well, I think Porter knows better, but I don't know. Is Isaac going to be ready for spring ball, Porter?
Do you have any insight into the current health? That's the one thing.
Like the actual
sure.
health matters on that front.
Right. Yeah. The expectation is that he'll be ready in at least most capacity. I don't know that he's going to be 100%. As a quarterback, obviously, they're not going to push it.
Right.
Especially the last couple of years. But he should be ready to at least go through reps.
Being able to learn a new offense for the first time and be at full physical health or close to is going to be optimal for a guy who was thrown to the wolves last year, had some decent, bright spots, but struggled mightily, as most true freshman quarterbacks do in college football. So it will benefit him to be able to get the lay of the land in Jason's offense. And frankly, it'll help him having a guy like Devin ahead of him who can show him the ropes. Because if we were operating with a completely new quarterback room with a new offensive coordinator that nobody who really had previous experience with, then it is kind of going back to what you're saying. Everybody's wondering who's got the leg up, who's leading the charge at the moment. It's going to be Devin. It should be Devin. And, as you mentioned with Jason, Utah has to hope that they don't have to go 3 or 4 or 5 deep as they have the last couple of years.
Yeah, and he also said the quarterback room is full for right now. That was a topic of some people as to whether or not they were going to try to add to come spring transfer portal time, which is still a number of months away. So there is that. But we did hear from Coach Witt this week. We did hear from Morgan Scalley this week in addition to Jason Beck. That was my first time interviewing Jason one-on-one. And as far as the most reacted to pieces of information, I guess that news is that which is extraordinary, and people hone in on the things that are most topical. I feel like it's not a surprise that Cameron Rising is no longer on the roster. Coach Witt said he would allow Cam to tell us his plans when Cam is ready. If it's happened, I haven't seen it. I'm also not online very much, thank goodness. So as we now kind of do the emotional Cam Rising look back, what's fair to say about his tenure at Utah?
I don't want to say he's one of the best players as much as he's one of the most important players in Kyle Whittingham's tenure as college football coach. He's a guy that, came in exactly at the right time at the tail end of the previous archaic iteration of college football where you had to transfer in and sit a year, got to learn behind Tyler Huntley, got to get schooled in Andy Ludwig's offense, and had such an up and down career, even here, Spence. Like, people forget that he beat out Jake Bentley for the starting job and then suffered that shoulder tear like within the first 10 minutes of that COVID year opener against USC. He's done for the year. Comes back kind of up against it. Charlie Brewer transfers in from Baylor, gets the starting spot. Obviously, things did not go well. They looked to Cam in that, famous triple overtime loss to San Diego State, and ever since, Cam changed the trajectory of the program when it was fully healthy, and Andy Ludwig had a plethora of talent at his disposal. In football, you're always going to remember the quarterback, good or bad. I do think it's an unfortunate end in this era of college football. I think there were a lot of folks who were fed inaccurate information, who reacted wrongly in this NIL era and ran with assumptions. Let's just say this fan base in this school is not in any sort of bargaining position to be like shaking their fist at, good or bad quarterback play, because historically it hasn't been there.
Yeah.
So when you have a guy that's won 2 Pac-12 championships and taken you to 2 Rose Bowls, to me, the writing's on the wall. But again, fan is always an abbreviation of fanatic.
You know what it is? And by the way, I don't want to make you nervous. 16 people watching us on YouTube right now. Porter, alert the sales staff.
It's the glasses.
We currently have 16 people watching. I really never check our YouTube feed because the way I look right now is the way I look every day in the winter. I've got my PJs. I got my black sweatsuit on. I've got my Roan hat on. This is kind of the deal.
They were like, this is what Jason Beck looks like?
Have you ever been Chris Cornell for Halloween?
Who's Chris Cornell?
Oh, come on.
Soundgarden?
Wasn't it? I mean, he's solo now.
Oh, I thought Chris Cornell died.
No, he's still alive and kicking. Oh, he did.
Yeah, he's not solo.
We are going down from 16 now, Spence.
Canceled.
I saw a video. I guess it's the algorithm. Chris Cornell did a cover of "Nothing Compares to You" on the Howard Stern show.
Wow.
And may he rest in peace.
Wow.
But
Look at you, man.
I was like, man, he looks like Kamrani. So maybe to honor him as he has passed, as I knew.
I mean, Soundgarden is of a certain era that I could still pull off. I am barely old enough, but I could be a lot of things for Halloween, Spence, as you know.
Yes, you have been.
Culturally ambiguous for you and all the folks in this great state. I can pull off whatever is somewhat appropriate.
He died a long time ago.
Like around 2020?
2017.
Oh, wow.
Porter, let's do a little Chris Cornell in honor of the fallen today.
Solo?
He did he did a lot of solo work. I didn't know about it. Now I've listened to a bunch. I'm like, yeah, he looks like Chris. But rest in peace. We're with you, Chris Cornell. Moving on from that. One more Utah football thing. So 16 transfers, 25 new players via just, high school kids that have committed. So that's 41 new players, which is 53% of the roster. How does that change the prescient nature of getting kids on campus? Because you and I have discussed this, and it's not an opinion. It's a fact that the best Utah football seasons have come after a stretch of recruit, develop, couple years in the program. Now you know the deal. Now have they had some freshmen that have been great? Sure, that happens from time to time. But how does that change the approach where you can no longer really rely on this whole like, hey, we've recruited you, you're kind of undervalued, but we see something in you, we're going to change positions, it's going to take a couple years, and then you're really going to fly like a Nate Orchard or something, although Nate was pretty good right out of the gates. But how does that change the urgent nature of, making sure that you're building something right away as opposed to relying on the long game?
Well, I'm going to throw you a curveball. I'm going to do a little crosstalk on you.
I love crosstalk.
Can I counter with that 22 team, Cam Rising transfer, Jaquindon Jackson transfer, Tavion Thomas transfer, Dalton Kincaid transfer, mainly offensively, but that iteration of Utah was starting to show us what was going to be necessary. And I agree with you that historically it has come from within. And Kyle said it himself the other day, like the model is changing and you have to be aggressive. And I think Utah was a little bit on the back foot in terms of really leaning into it until this year, obviously. Like in previous years when they were in theory fully healthy, you were looking at adding bit pieces here or there. But with the injuries sustained at quarterback last year with Andy Ludwig moving on mid-year, with so many guys transferring in and out, this roster was due for a pseudo overhaul, so to speak. So this shouldn't be all that surprising, and it will be challenging for Utah because, you know, Kyle's mantra is you become us, we don't become you. And in this day and age, you just have to make sure you have a bedrock of dudes who are A, really good, and B, committed to being here long term, because this is, while this school and, you know, community historically under Kyle has been very good, things can go south if that mantra doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. I just want dudes who love ball.
Dudes.
I want dudes who love ball, man. That's what I want on the roster. 10 personnel, 11 personnel.
They got dudes.
13 personnel. They got dudes. But here's what I'll say. To your point, maybe there is more proof of concept to the way Kyle's adapted that I'm giving him credit for. I just kind of, you tell me.
It's mainly offensively.
Let's
be honest.
For sure, yeah.
Now you can be overreactive to the Tanuvasa and Calhoun exits, but Calhoun was a transfer himself. He came from Michigan,
right? Mm-hmm.
And while he was okay last year, like, he wasn't, you know, an all-conference player. He was a decent young cornerback who had some really bright moments, and you know, he makes that interception against BYU, the game's over. Not trying to single this guy out, but this is not a guy. This was not Jalen Johnson, basically, is what I'm saying.
Right.
And Keanu is or was the prototypical Utah defensive player, a guy that Utah signed as a 3-star kid. As Utah signs a bunch of those, nobody'd really heard of him. Went on his mission, came here, you know, sat behind some other very talented defensive tackles, and when it was his time, he proved to everybody that he's really good. But to me, it's always going to be the offensive side of the ball, because I think the proof is in the pudding for kids both locally and nationally, that as long as Kyle's here, as long as Morgan's here, there is a fundamental understanding of this is a program that's going to be good at defense, and you can come here and you can be made to look really good if you play well and play with good players. Offensively now is where I think it's always going to be a moving target, so to speak, because, I mean, Jason is, I think, Kyle's 10th offensive coordinator in like 12 or 13 years. Yeah. So, like, we thought Andy was going to be the last one. Turned out that's not the case. And I think the Jason Beck hire is fascinating on a multitude of levels, but above all, it's the fact that they had to basically redo the entire offense without the offensive line, which is huge. And you can make an argument, or you can't make an argument. It's a fact that it's going to be the strength of the offense going into next year, which should help everybody around them.
Yeah, and your point about the O-line, and Jason really underscored that in my visit with him. And I thought there were times where they struggled a bit, but I think they were probably the main linchpin consistently for the offense last year. You get all of them back, you know, you're able to retain the same coach to make sure that they're ready to go, because obviously that would be a big deal if the line was dialed in, healthy, ready to go. And the reason I bring it up is, and again, you know, potentially the proof of concept might be there in a way that maybe I'm not fully grasping or understanding, but I just am starting to get this feel, and, you know, maybe it's an echo chamber, but there's some Utah football fans that are very concerned. It's almost like Jazz fans who right now are just kind of like, are we ever going to be good again? Is it possible for the Jazz to be good in the modern day and age of pro basketball? And I'm starting to get a feel that there are some Ute fans that are looking around and they're saying, like, are we at the end of this golden era? Now that football's changing, are we going to be able to adapt and still be the program that we're all used to for about 15 years now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair assessment and potential assumption, but I think it would be short-sighted, frankly. And if you're at that point 3 years removed from a Rose Bowl, I'm sorry, man. Like, there are so many other programs that have been, you know, begging to beat down the door of something like a conference championship or a Rose Bowl for a very long time, schools that have never been there. I mean, there were schools still in the previous iteration of the Pac-12 that had never won a conference championship, never been to a Rose Bowl. So it's like the expectations here are so high, and Kyle is a victim of his own success and the culture that he's created, because every single year, in a weird way, Spence, it's tied to the little brother complex that a lot of these fans were raised with, I assume, growing up when BYU was really
For
good
sure.
and Utah
Yeah,
wasn't
for
good.
sure.
And then in the last 20 years, it's changed. And we talked a lot in the fall about are Utah fans overcompensating in a sense because they're scared that the tables are turning again. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's just that you're not a program that's going to win a conference championship every year, whether it was in the Pac-12 or in the Big 12. You should be good enough to contend every year. But Utah fans really need to understand that the haves and have-nots are going to only separate further in this NIL revenue sharing era.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality.
And I do think, depending on your age, and to your point, if you're a Utah football fan, 40s, 50s, 60s, and above, you were around and very aware where for 20-plus years, if you made the BYU game close.
It was a big deal.
Right. And then occasionally you get an Eddie Johnson, Scott Mitchell crazy game where you actually get a win. And I do feel like, and again, we all come to this with our own echo chamber and our own little cognitive dissonance. And so maybe this is just people I talk to, and younger Ute fans will be vaping and, streaming on Twitch or whatever, and they don't give a rip about any of this. I do believe there is a large portion of this fan base that is very nervous that at some point the pendulum would have shifted and we're back to like a Lavelle Edwards type feel, and BYU will have the upper hand where Utah for a generation has had it. Because these things are cyclical. They change. They always do.
They are. I think the Kyle Whittingham-Bronco Mendenhall rivalry was great for the rivalry, personally, because there was some piss and vinegar to it. I think for Utah fans, it's just simply hard to hate BYU now, considering they know members of that coaching staff that did big, great things at Utah. As a lot of people have said, as Aaron Roderick told me like 2 or 3 years ago during that COVID year when BYU had that great start with Zach, like Kalani made BYU cool again, which is one, hard to do, and two, impressive, and three, if you're a Utah fan, yeah, it's a little scary, but like have a little, confidence. Like I know the inferiority complex that spans all sports fan bases in this state is off the charts, but I would ask fans to look to recent history and just say, like, until you have 2 or 3 sustained losing seasons where things look tremendously bleak, as so many programs in this country have to deal with, then we can get there. Like 2 years ago, they had the most insane rash of injuries, worse than last year. They went 8-4. People forget that. We talk about 2023, Spence, like we talk about 2024, and we should not.
I agree with that. And that was one of Kyle's best coaching jobs, to get that ragtag group because of injuries left and right. To get to 8 wins was a remarkable job. Let's stay in the college football space before we get over to the lads. We got to talk the lad. We got to talk about the lads today. MC'd an event last night where one of my panelists was Rick Neuheisel. And one of the topics was private equity in college sports and venture capitalist firms and funds getting involved, which is inevitable. Mark Lazary himself, who owns the Milwaukee Bucks, has given several public interviews. And I'm stunned at how forthcoming he's been. But a lot of these PE guys, when there really is no regulation in a space that has dollars to be printed, they don't give a rip. They're just going to be front-facing about, yes, I want to get involved here because I know what the long-term game is. And Lazary, a few different times publicly, is like, yeah, I am looking to buy college football teams. I'm looking to buy 48, 49% of them for hundreds of millions of dollars. And the teams that are discussed are the ones that will be eventually a part of this one big group that we've talked about for years now. And then that TV deal will just shoot through the roof. But I wonder, from a local standpoint, it's an interesting dichotomy between the University of Utah, which is publicly owned, and Brigham Young, which is a private institution. And I don't know what sort of red tape you have to traverse or what hoops you have to jump through with a publicly owned institution. But my guess is you got to get the governor involved, you got to get the state involved, and everybody's going to have their hand out. Whereas if you're a private institution like BYU, it seems like it could be a really seamless transaction. And there are a lot of BYU fans that I've heard over the years say the only thing that stands in the way of BYU athletics being consistently great is BYU. So if you could buy the football team, because what I do believe will happen is you're going to have some centralized leadership, and the owners of your team will have a tremendous amount of say on how you operate. So they've already hired GMs and such. But as I think about this more and more, I just wonder if the private institutions are going to have a leg up because they're able to just be a little bit more seamless with how these transactions go down.
Not only that, they don't really have to be held accountable to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, as a reporter and as any member of the public, you can FOIA or grandma anything you want from a public institution because it is public record.
Mm-hmm.
Might take a little while,
yeah,
but you can send these requests to the University of Utah, Utah State, University of Alabama, whoever, and say, I want this, this, and this. And it might take a year. I filed a FOIA to UCLA during the Big Ten move, and it took them like 16 months. They finally got it to me. Private university doesn't have to really respond to anybody,
mm-hmm.
and especially if it's one owned by a religious institution. And to your point about having a tremendous amount of fiscal backing from what I would say is a larger, deeper pool of richer alumni, the BYUs, in theory, the BYUs, the Notre Dames, these types of kind of old school throwback private schools who have good football programs should have a leg up. But I think there is a complicating factor, though, when you bring in the fact that they are owned by the religious institution here. And as we've talked about, if the church wanted BYU sports to be good, they could have made them good for a long time, but now they definitely could. And I guess you can make an argument the basketball team is getting there. And I'm not saying the church paid for AJ DeBanza, but you catch my drift.
Yeah.
It's like the ability to funnel funds legally now to your alma mater or the team that you cheer for is going to be easier than ever.
Well, with lack of regulation in place, if the church really wanted to get serious, and they did about stepping in, your starting running back next year would be Saquon Barkley.
Be awesome.
They could get whoever they wanted because you can pay a player anything right now, and there's no regulation. I wonder, I'm just thinking out loud, do you think there would be a part of a transaction like this that the church would embrace? To say, like, okay, it's not
with PE guy, like with private equity.
Yeah, let's say, and look, the problem with this topic, even though I believe it's inevitable, and I think it's interesting to discuss because when it does happen, we'll have been prepared because we're talking about it. Until it happens, we don't know what the format looks like. We don't know what the transaction looks like. We don't know what the percentages look like because if you buy 49% of a team, they maintain majority control with 51%. So how much say do you actually have? But just thinking out loud here, there have been times, the Gary Crowton stuff, where BYU athletics has felt like more of a burden to the powers that be in the church than like something they use for their advantage. Hell, they canceled it up at Rick's or BYU Idaho, I guess is what they call it now. And Vaisa Kahema, who I've had on the show a number of times, for a few years was on this thing like if we don't, figure some things out, the church might just cancel BYU athletics as well. I don't know that I ever bought that was going to be a possibility. And look, neither you or I are behind closed doors here on South Temple to kick the tires with the brethren. So let's be clear.
If they wanted to.
Have a feeling they'd ask some questions if you knocked on the door today. Give me a minute to shave. I could probably figure it out. But do you think there would be a part of a transaction like this where the church would kind of go, all right, yeah, it's yours to run. You figure it out.
I don't know. I think when you're talking about a religious institution like that, they are always going to err on the side of caution.
Mm-hmm.
And getting into business with somebody that they probably don't know all that well or entirely, it just could end up like being a bad look for a myriad of reasons. I could see a way where you talk about minority ownership stakes, kind of the way we see, I don't know, the Lindsey Vonns buying into the Royals and your guy D Wade, partial owner of Real Salt Lake, like that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily think we'll get to like the 49% for really any school. I don't.
Speaking of a public records request, can you do one about Dwayne Wade?
Cannot.
Why?
Because it's not they're private. These are private organizations.
Now,
if D Wade was like, an assistant coach at the University of Utah, I could, FOIA and see how much they're paying him, but he's not.
I just want to know if that was ever a real thing because I was watching, I think it was the All-Star coverage, and he was on a panel, and the NBA bylaws clearly say if you're a part of the ownership group, you can't have a job in media. So I've always been kind of.
Well, that doesn't apply to Tom Brady either in the NFL. So
Sure. So I've always been kind of confused as to how this went down. I don't know what the bylaws say in the NFL, but in the NBA, it's like, yeah, you can't have a job in media if you're a part of the ownership group.
He loves to golf here like you, though.
He does, and somebody introduced him as part owner of the Jazz, and he pushed back.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
I can't remember what he didn't. He said it's not part owner; it's like advisor or something.
Semantics.
Well, is it? Because I just
we don't know.
I still want to know exactly what the deal is there.
Can you get an audience with the owner of Sports Entertainment Group?
I have once.
Okay.
What
about on air?
On air.
Oh, yeah?
I have once on air. Privately, it's just when I see my guy Rye at Jazz games, we're like, what up? Yeah, exchanging ideas.
You do the Tiger Woods big dog.
Yeah, synergies. A couple dudes with their hats flipped backwards, a couple stylish guys. So whenever I talk with Rye, it's just we're chopping it up. It's not talking shop.
Okay. Well,
just for our listeners, I'm being facetious. I very rarely talk to him.
Doesn't Haberstroh do these doesn't he do these uncovering these NBA mysteries?
Little bit. Maybe that's the guy to talk to.
Stick him on it.
All right, one more football question, and then we'll do a little what the hell is going on with our local soccer club. I hate to make you our resident Deion Sanders expert, but you've been down there, you've interviewed him.
Everybody's been asking me all week, so go ahead.
Okay, so this feels a little bit like Jerry Jones falling in love with a shiny new toy and, falling in love with something that isn't sustainable but is exciting in the moment. It's like your buddy that falls in love with a 22-year-old, and you're like, dude, don't do it. It's not a good idea. And then over time, that manifests itself. It feels like the shiny new toy syndrome. I don't think but I could totally be wrong. Just knowing how much control Jerry wants and feeling this John Morant dunk, by the way.
He threw it in. It's not a dunk. JP's got to have a take on it. Your hand has to hold on to the rim.
That's still so cool, though. I'm sorry. That's for
not a dunk.
Okay. It's still really cool.
Okay. And it didn't count.
It didn't. And I could be completely wrong. It just feels like Deion might want the a surety that he has certain control that Jerry has not seemed to be how his coaches in the past. So if it goes down, Deion Sanders, first of all, do you think it will? And if it does, what do you think it looks like?
Well, I don't think it will happen just because there has to be so many bullet points that are checked off for Deion to do it. I'm not even talking about Jerry conceding ground to Deion. I'm talking about Jerry Jones would have to pay the University of Colorado $8 million for a buyout.
That's the buyout number?
Right now. Yep. It goes down each year. It's $8 million right now. They would have to, and our resident Cowboys guy can talk about this, they gave Dak Prescott $231 million of guaranteed money.
They're married to Dak, yeah.
Are they going to trade? Are they going to trade that contract to another team? And will any team take that? Then you have to have the Cowboys convince another team that is in the top 3 to let them trade up to draft Shador. All of that has to happen. I just think it's asking too much, frankly. Now, that means I'm holding Deion to his words that the only way he would go to the NFL is if he could coach both of his sons, plural. He can get Shiloh. Shiloh will be 7th round undrafted. Shador will be the trick. Dak will be the potentially unmovable contract. But Jerry Jones is 82 years old. And I don't think it's a shiny new toy. It's a guy that he knows very well. It's a guy he's gone to war with over contract negotiations. It's a guy he loves and respects. If Jerry Jones wants to get the Cowboys back to peak relevance, Deion Sanders can get them to relevance. Now, I don't think he's going to be able to get them to an NFL Super Bowl championship like in 2 or 3 years because the shtick doesn't work in the NFL. Mm-hmm. In college, the coaches are the stars. In the pros, the players are the stars. And I'm sure everybody respects Deion Sanders for who he is, how awesome he was. But how many of these guys are our age, Spence? Like, these guys didn't watch Deion. Like, they didn't watch him in Atlanta. They didn't watch him in San Francisco or Dallas. Like, they watched him as, a very outgoing, bombastic NFL Network host who was great in media, and they've seen him succeed in coaching. So I think it's going to be a bleep show for the next couple weeks. But I don't think Deion will end up in Dallas. If he does, the internet will explode, and it will be tremendous television. Ratings will be through the roof. Reality show, the entire thing. But I think the bullet points that need to be checked off, there's just too many to get to.
If Jerry says we can't guarantee Shador, but we'll grab Shiloh, and we're kind of married to Dak, you think Deion just says, okay, that's a deal breaker?
No, because in Boulder, Deion walks on water, man. He made that program relevant. Even if he doesn't go, he's going to, and he should get a healthy pay raise for what he's been able to do in 2 years. So he'll get a contract extension. I mean, right now he's being paid barely less than $6 million a year. For everything that Colorado has been able to accomplish in the last 2 years, that's a steal if we're operating off of, market value. In the NFL under Jerry, you have a couple bad years. I mean, I'm just thinking I don't think Deion's ego is big, but I think he's also too smart to put himself in such a potentially compromising position.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at Boulder at CU, he's president, CEO, all of the things.
Yeah.
And he's earned a tremendously long runway for a very long time. And if they have a couple down years, he can just say, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go work for NBC or Monday Night Football and make just as much, if not more. Whereas coaching the Cowboys in the NFL, as we've seen, it is a cutthroat business.
Yeah, and you are hired to be fired over time, but if Jerry cuts him some equity, if he just...
those two,
yeah.
Listen, man, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The Shador thing is hard. As Porter knows, I think the Dak thing would be harder because that contract is insane. So
it is insane. I do wonder aloud because it just feels like there's so many, and I'm coming at this through the prism of a Jets fan, where our quarterback currently takes ayahuasca and talks to caterpillars and is bad at playing the position, and we haven't had a good quarterback for years. I've got to imagine there would be an owner that talks himself into it. We'll try it. If Dallas doesn't want him, he's good enough. We'll try it.
Sure. Yeah, his name's Woody Johnson.
I know, man. And I wouldn't want him in New York, but it's better than what we've had. You're not wrong. They paid him too much, and he's not bad. But he's not elite. He's not great.
And it took them I remember it took them 2 years or something to get this deal done. They went through. I think they had to franchise tag him a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
Porter, didn't it take him forever to get this deal done?
Yeah. There was a franchise tag. There was threats of a holdout that he missed. He missed time during the off season, right? So, there's a lot there, and Spence knows I've been on this one for a while.
Yeah, it's tough because, like I said, you could do a lot worse. You can talk to a lot of NFL fans who are like, I'd love a Dak Prescott.
Without a doubt.
But how many tag? Yeah.
But how many NFL owners have the deep pockets that Jerry has that own the team that is an institution like the Cowboys? No offense to, I can't even use the Jets. If we're talking about, I don't know, the Jaguars, if they want to move on from Trevor Lawrence, I guess Khan has a bunch of money. My bad. I'm trying to think of
the Cardinals,
or even the Steelers.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody
the Packers.
The Packers, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those cheeseheads are socialisms up there, man. Everybody owns the team. You're gonna convince some folks up there to pay Dak $231 million. I love my cheeseheads. I love Wisconsin.
Yeah, for sure. All right, couple minutes left here. Let's see. Well, I guess here's what I'll say. So, according to what has been publicly discussed and then also conversations behind the scenes, Chicho's family was like, we can't do it. We got to go. We wanted a fresh start. Matt Crook's family was like, yeah, not a big fan. Got to get out of here. They move on from Andres Gomez, proof of concept, check in your back pocket. I get that. Anderson Julio, they move on from. For a team that set a record for points and goals scored last year, obviously lost in the first round, do all of these moves to you say something about this locker room and obviously a little bit of a disconnect, or is it just we need to analyze these one at a time? And Pops, that's my guy.
It's your guy, and I know he's about the vibes. And I think it does behoove RSL to have your guy at the helm right now because things are choppy. The waters are choppy once again. I think you have to break each individual exit on its own, but when you look at it collectively, what does it tell ownership of the levels of wanting to invest again? Because you're taking a bath on Chicho, $4.5 million.
$4.5 million.
Crooks was a tam gam, whatever, probably $1 million something, but he's gone. Does the ownership group want to put forth that type of money again when things could potentially go sideways? I mean, $6 million for this club was a big deal. Getting Chicho Arango was a huge deal for many reasons. And the fact that he's gone after a year and a half, it's just salt in the wound for a fan base that I think finally felt like it was turning the corner after the DLH years. They punched above their weight. They were praying for star power, and for 4.5, 5 months last year, it was on full display. And you know, in the blink of an eye, it's gone. The Gomez thing, like to your point, I mean that 10 out of 10 you make that move. But one, you know, side plot regarding that is MLS. The construct is still so odd that like RSL isn't like pocketing that $14 million all on its own. Like it is spread out. So I'm sure, you know, some of that will be able to go towards future spending. Maybe some of it went to, you know, signing a Diogo Gonçalves. But to me, it's more about like, is the ownership group going to step up again? Because, you know, listening to Kurt Schmidt yesterday, I didn't hear him on your show, but I listened to his press conference down there.
You could have faked that you heard him on the show.
I could have, but I did. You know, I want to be accurate.
Fair enough.
He said, like, you know, a striker, whether it costs $100,000 or $10 million, it doesn't matter. It matters.
Of course it does.
And it has mattered for a long time. And that's the one spot that RSL hadn't been able to figure out for 10 years. And they've had it figured out with a guy that became the captain immediately when he came here. And things went sideways, but you have to invest money to be good. And I understand that they are a develop and win club, whatever their mantra is. And that's great. And it's good. But you still have to prove to fans that like the product that you're going to put out on the field is going to be good enough. And I mean, like the amount of goals that they lost going into this offseason, into this new season with CONCACAF around the corner, it's wild, man, because everything is being pushed back now. They're not going to get a DP done in time before CONCACAF. They're potentially not going to get a DP done before a DP forward done before the summer. And then when you potentially bring in a DP forward in the summer, you're going to have that same hamster wheel thing of it's going to take this guy, presuming he's an international signing, it's going to take him a few months to learn the lay of the land, and then you're just kicking the ball down the road. And then, like, during that time, is Diego Luna going to attract more attention? Is he going to be moved on? I think just fans, like anybody, Utah Jazz fans, University of Utah football fans, RSL fans, they just want to feel like their players want to be here. So the inferiority complex is triggered to a very alarming level when people say this place wasn't for me.
And it's happened with RSL over the past couple of years in a way that it never has.
Yeah.
Severino,
Yeah.
you know, but look. All right, we're up against it. Got to get Gordon Monson coming up next, CK. Always great to see you, man, okay?
Appreciate you.
All right, Gordon joins us next right here on ESPN 700. All right, we're going to bring in Craig Bolerjack, voice of the Utah Jazz, coming up in just a little bit. We also have Sports Court later on. We'll get back to a little college and pro football in the 5 o'clock hour. We're going to say goodnight at 6 o'clock tonight. You're going to hear a little best of today, then the Rockets and the Kings on our radio station. But our next guest, it's always better when they're live in studio, but we are part today. It's the Big Show, Big Hour, starting on a Thursday with Gordon Monson from the Salt Lake Tribune. Gordo, happy Thursday. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine, thanks, Spence. How are you today?
I'm good, my friend. I felt like you dusted off the fastball today. I felt like you reached back into the old bag of tricks and pulled out the Gordon Monson fastball with the piece you wrote about the once proud Delta Center. I don't know if it's haunted, but maybe it is. Haunted, plagued by the ghosts and ghouls of losing. It's a perfect Gordon Monson column. Certainly once upon a time, as you point out and as you outline with data and numbers, this was a fortress that simply it just is not now, and it's not just the basketball team, it's the hockey team. So give me the origin story. When did you decide to do this, and let's unpack it for our listeners.
I just came to me that both the Jazz and the Utah Hockey Club have the worst home winning percentage in each of their leagues. And that, I'm telling you, Spence, for guys like us who've been around a while, when you see something like that, it kind of smacks you upside the head. It's just like I understand what's going on. You've got a new hockey team here, new to this area, and rebuilding and trying to make some progress. And the Jazz, it's just weird for them to have the record they have at home with only 3 wins. It's just that is not our orientation for that particular building. Remember back in the day when, you had Michael Jordan, you had Kobe Bryant, you had great players talking about how tough it was to play at the Delta Center. And now it's just kind of like, and I get it. I get what's going on with the tanking and all that sort of thing. But still, that aspect to it is just weird.
Yeah, and it makes you make a lot of really good, fair, interesting points. And I find covering the Jazz and the hockey team, to your point that you point out in the piece, you give them a bit of a pass because they're not an expansion team, but they're a new team. And, it'll take some time. Even if you're not an expansion team but a new team, you had to uproot your entire life and move to a new place. So let's see how this young group comes together. Let's see what Bill Armstrong's plan is. From a Jazz standpoint, though, it's certainly a different day and a different era, and quite frankly, a different day, a different era in pro basketball. And occasionally, you'll hear the quiet part said out loud when Jason Kidd says after a playoff loss, "You guys don't get it. We're just millionaires cheering for each other." And you're just kind of like, okay, don't say that out loud, man. We get it. And Kevin Durant at times will, we never think about the fans, just so you guys know. There is this feeling where no matter who you play for, no matter what team you play for, as long as you're in the group, you're in the group, and you're just kind of part of this ecosystem. And it's cyclical. Maybe at times you'll be able to turn a losing team into a winning team over time. But, it almost feels like, because you point out Jordan and Kobe, and oftentimes so many great players don't even play in Salt Lake. It's a weird thing to cover because you're kind of stuck in between, like, really wishing it felt like it used to with how good the Jazz were back in the day and how many great players came in here and played the Jazz. And the highest rated basketball game of all time was played in Salt Lake. It was Michael Jordan's last game when he hit the shot over Brian Russell here in Utah. We have serious basketball history and pedigree, but how do you really cover the thing when it does feel like we've moved into this new era where it's just this group of millionaires cheering for each other regardless of wins and losses?
Man, I'll tell you, that is a dangerous way to think. And it's just because what is the one thing that the NBA traditionally has brought that draws fans in? Well, it's a couple things. One is the stars. I mean, they've marketed that to the nth degree. But the other thing is the freaking competition. If that goes south, then what are people looking at? Now they're looking at the Harlem Globetrotters against the Washington Generals. I mean, that can't be. That's a dangerous thought, I think, for any executive in the NBA to think that that could seep out and really become a reality in people's minds. Because then now you're just going to a play. You're just going to a movie. You're going to be entertained, but you're not there to see a real competitive battle. And I think that's what makes sports great. You know, I look around the Delta Center now, and a lot of the fans in that building are, you know, they've been around. They're longtime Jazz fans. But for the younger people, I really feel bad for them because it's like, it's just not the same. And the fans do their job. I mean, the fans try hard. I mean, you've heard the way that crowd cheers for the Jazz. And maybe some of them don't want to see them win right now because they get the nuances of the NBA and how you got to rebuild. But, man, they don't act like it when you're in the action. When you're watching these games, they are – the fans are solid. But it's not at the level it once was. And who can blame these folks for that? I mean – what they're watching is nowhere near what they were watching when the Jazz were going 38-3 at home. You know, I mean, and I remember talking to Big Dog, and I put that in the column, asking him how before a game whether he thought how he felt about the prospects for winning, and all he said is, "Where's the game at?" It's at the Delta Center. Enough said. That was it. They knew, or they were 99% sure they were going to win, because of the very environment in which they were playing. And I look at those fans that are at the Delta Center now, and the players don't have that feeling, and neither do the fans.
You bring up a really interesting dynamic that has been discussed before, and you said, you know, otherwise it's just a play. You're going to see a movie. And ultimately, isn't that what it kind of is anyway? Because I do find this interesting, and there are levels to your fandom, right? Like I'm sure there are plenty of people across our market that just like get excited to go to a Jazz game, and they don't really care who the Jazz are playing. It's a night away from your life. It's a night away from your worries, and sports has always been this great escape. And I can remember growing up, and there were two things that I used to attend or watch that made grown men act like lunatics, and one was live music and the other was sports. And I'm like, I kind of want to stay in that space because it's fun, right? And ultimately, we do work in the toy aisle, and sports is supposed to be a little bit of a respite. But as somebody who's covered it for as long as you have, what's the difference between going to see a play and a Jazz game?
Well, for me, you bring up a great point because there are different motivations for different people. I mean, Spence, when I think, what do you go to a game for if you're not covering it? You're going there to study what's going on the floor and to get into the details of what's happening. I mean, maybe some fans do that, and maybe some fans just want to, like you say, get out and have a good time. But it sure seems to me like, and you can look this up and see how fans react when they're cheering for a winning team. They fill the building. It's tough to get a ticket. They want to be there. They're motivated to be there because the players are a representation of them. It's I remember I used to make you cry when I would bring this up again and again when I had that discussion with this cultural anthropologist who said that these teams represent the communities. They're like the feudal armies, modern feudal armies that are going to do battle against other communities. For what? For people to feel good about themselves, for people to get a boost of self-esteem. Why? Because they're proud of their community and they're proud of the team that represents them, and they're going out to do battle against the other ones. And thankfully, it's not typically violent, and we can be grateful for that. But this. I remember talking to a sports psychologist about that, and he said fans are actually living their lives to some extent through the teams for which they cheer. And that's why some people really get into they always cheer for winners, for blue bloods, for teams that have established records. That you're root for the Yankees, or sorry, I mean I know that's close to your heart, but you have other reasons for that, or the Dodgers, or some team that it really represents, and other fans cheer for the underdog, and those are the ones that just sort of want to see if the underdog can win. but the local fans, they are locked into this stuff, or at least that's the way it used to be. Remember when the Jazz were going to deep into the playoffs every year? And what would it look like around here, man? You had people with their flags hanging out of their cars, and it was like this was a representation. This was a breakaway republic. Root for the Utah Jazz because it makes all of us here in Utah feel good. And that goes beyond just going to watch a good movie. The only thing I can think of in as far as customers go that relates to that is, I don't know if you care what gas station you go to, what gas you buy, but folks who buy Apple products, it seems like they get behind the product like it means something to them, like they're connected to it. But that's relatively rare, but not in sports.
Yeah, but then there's the one annoying friend that hates Apple and gets the Android. Then he has the green bubble in his text, and the text thread is just ruined. Can we all get on the same page? Because you hate the one guy on the thread that has the Android because you just want the blue Apple text, and then because of him, it's all green.
Let me ask you this, Spence. In all your years of going to sporting events, what stands out in your mind as far as atmosphere goes? Where it really was different than going in to watch a movie or play, where there was electricity in the air. Can you think of it? I know you've been to many events from coast to coast. Is there something that stands out to you?
Yeah, it's the high stakes stuff. It's, being a PR intern with Kim Turner and Dave Allred, 97, 98, when the Jazz were in the finals, and being in the building and watching Stuart Scott lose his mind when Michael Jordan hit the shot. It's when the stakes are high. And there are a number of different examples back at the Garden when the Bulls were in town or the Pacers were in town. I'll never forget Larry Johnson's 4-point play against the Pacers. I've never felt anything like that in my life, and I was there courtside to experience that at the Garden. I've been to World Series. I've been to Super Bowls. Some of the most intense, it's like an intangible thing. As a soccer expert, you would know. Some of the most intense atmospheres I've been in are like penalty kicks with something on the line, like the RSL MLS Cup win in 2009 against Seattle, when, a lot of people forget Kyle Beckerman missed his PK, Landon Donovan skied his. There's something about the end of soccer matches that carry a flair for the dramatic that feels a little bit more prescient and urgent than other sports. But whenever I've been Final Fours, we could keep going. A Utah BYU game, a Pac-12 championship. Like, whenever the stakes are high, that's when you can feel what makes sports different than simply watching a movie. But for a regular season Jazz Hornets game, you might as well turn on a documentary at times.
And I just might sometimes. Unless I think there's going to be a reason, there's going to be a payoff for what you're seeing. But fans generally already have that connection. And so I got to give the Jazz fans credit. The fans in this area are pretty I don't think they're fully unique, but they are extraordinary in a lot of ways where the care factor is high. And that's a big reason the Delta Center was so sure. They had great teams. They've had fine teams through the years who are getting those great home records. But the fan, you can't tell me the fans don't play a role in that. And in talking to the players as they came in to the Delta Center back in the day, man, they certainly felt it. And they were the ones doing the competing. So, I think it's effective. And it's one of the reasons why in most situations or many situations where the team is good, it's very difficult to beat them on their home floor or on their home field or on their home pitch. And I was at that RSL game covering it too, at MLS Cup. And I remember that, man. And that place it was in Seattle, and that place was buzzing, man. It was just cool to see. So it doesn't matter what sport it is. But I don't remember feeling that way very often in a movie.
Yeah, and there is a difference. We used to, when baseball was mired in the steroid era, and then you would hear like Brad Pitt say, I used HGH for my role in Fight Club. It's kind of like, all right, well, what's the difference? If there are athletes, if there are actors and entertainers using the same products that are illegal in pro sports, really what's the difference if the whole idea is entertainment? And really it does come down to competition and whether or not you enjoy that and whether or not you enjoy an even playing field and and the moments that manifest themselves in a surprising way that nobody saw coming. John Stockton hits the shot against Houston to send the Jazz to the finals. You know, the moments that catch us off guard, and that's why you watch, because and that's why, by the way, it's an exercise in futility trying to gamble on this stuff. And I always tell people you got to be careful because it is so unpredictable. And in a way, it's kind of like a soap opera and a reality show that is the ultimate in reality because it's not scripted and the outcome oftentimes catches you off guard. It's the surprise moments when they actually manifest that remind you, like, yeah, that's why we watch. That's why this is fun.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't have said it better. And look, I was in Houston when Stockton hit that shot, and that building, talk about a care factor. I mean, the air just went straight out the door. And the fans, the home fans, were so disappointed. And you could hear the Jazz on the floor in that huge building. You could hear them yelling and the voices of exuberation and the thrill of victory. You know, that the old ABC Wide World of Sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And the thrill was amongst that little group down on the floor, and the rest of the building, or most of the rest of the building, was feeling the agony.
When I think about Jerry, may he rest in peace, I think about that moment because I don't think I'd ever seen him smile like that.
and that's what you want, man. In sports, that you want the thrill, you want the agony, you want the care factor to be off the charts. That's what makes it so exciting, and that's why when fans find themselves in those situations, that's when they get emotional. That's when you see people willing to pay the prices necessary to go to these games and to have an experience and to feel that vibe, and then to be able to go out on the street or go to a restaurant or go to wherever and go celebrate it afterwards. We've seen all of that. That's why they have parades when teams win championship. I don't think I've ever seen a parade after a Broadway play.
Let's see. No, I think that's correct. I have not seen a parade after a Broadway play. That would be a weird thing to do.
Although, tell my wife that, because when she goes and sees a movie she likes, then she goes and sees it like 4 or 5 times, and then we might see it at home on the TV at home another 4 or 5 times. She gets into that stuff.
I have to say, Lisa and I share that in common. It's almost like I'm the type that if I find a song I like, I'm listening to it 10,000 times before I listen to something else. I don't know why. That's just how I'm wired.
Yeah, I do that too. But tell me, what movie? Tell me the all-time movie for you that you couldn't get enough of it. What was it?
I went through this weird phase where I was fighting with a cable company, and that's never going to work because they turned off my cable and they claimed I didn't pay my bill. I was like 21. I think I bounced a check because I was a kid. And I was like, screw you, I paid. They're like, you didn't. I'm like, yes, I did. They're like, all right, fine, no cable. And so they won. But for like a year, I watched movies, and I watched a ton of movies that I had never watched before. This was like 20 years ago. Rushmore, I watched probably 40, 50 times. Scarface, over and over and over. It would be tough to pick just one. But yeah, I mean, it's like music. It's like when you pull up DoorDash to order dinner. It's like, I know this restaurant's good, so I'm just going to get that as opposed to trying something new. When you know something's good, that's kind of what you want.
Well, I mean, look, can I confess here? And there's really some guilt in some of this confession, not all of it. But the movie for me that I've probably seen more than any other.
Pitch Perfect.
Well, that was my guilty one. I really liked that, but I like Gladiator.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
It had that effect for me. I love that, Or one from the '80s. All you oldsters out there going back, Tender Mercies. You remember that movie, Robert Duvall?
Sure,
I
yeah.
just love that stuff, So I can take subtle storytelling and enjoy it again and again. But I still don't get. I mean, I like to think when I see a movie. I like movies that make me think, and then I'm going to hash it and rehash it and watch it again. But I still don't recall quite the thrill from those moments in sports over my lifetime that and you and I have been to a whole lot of them, and we've experienced it in buildings all over the place in all different kinds of sports. but there's an element to it that's just different. And when you go to the Delta Center now, for guys like you and me, I mean, we have memories there. Larry built the place in the early '90s, and from there, I mean, there have been so many moments in that building. They never got a championship there, but there have been so many thrilling moments. And it was, for me, more often than not, because I've exorcised the fan out of me, but I would look around and see the way the fans would react in that building. And then for me, it was just the thrill of watching raw competition on the floor that you didn't know exactly how it was going to go, but there was a good chance it was going to go the home team's way.
I just remember when we were doing the old show and you came in grumpy because Lisa was making you go to Pitch Perfect at the theaters, and you came in the next day ready to sing a cappella. It inspired you quite a bit.
I mean, isn't that just a stupid movie for me to have really, really liked? That one and Family Man. I mean, I love those two movies. I can't really explain it. Have you seen Family Man?
I have.
Family Man?
Yes, I have, Gordon. It won't surprise you.
Mediocre for you?
No. It's just whatever. I'll say it on air. It's one of those movies where a guy like me, people are like, yeah, you should watch this. I'm like, I know what you're saying. Okay. Message received. Thank you very much. So my family was like, hey, subtle hint here. Check this movie out. So yes, I've seen it 3 or 4 times.
But it had Nick Cage in it, so I probably would rank it low on the scale for you.
For sure. Let me go back to the community asset element of a sports team, because you always hear owners talk about that. Like, that's their motivation. They want this to be a community asset. They want this to be something the community's proud of. Is that compromised when the results aren't close to what they need to be for the community to be proud in the performance at all? Or is it, when an owner says that, do you feel like there's validity and, that's something that's authentic, or it's like this is just something I'm going to say so I can get $1 billion from the community to build something?
Yeah, I think I've seen some owners who have said that, and I think they are about the dollars. And then I've seen other owners who really do feel it. And you can guess which owner feels what way. But, Larry used to talk about this. Gail talked about it 1,000 times. And that was a gift to the community where you have your red, you have your blue, and you mix red and blue together. And what do you get? You get purple, right? Am I right on that?
That's correct. Well done.
But anyway, that's what you would get with the Jazz. And a place where people who in their college patronage would root completely against the other one, and now they're sitting next to each other, they're cheering for the same team. So I think there is a value that if it's authentic, and if the owners put a good team on the floor for fans to glom onto, then I think it's more authentic. And look, I think Ryan Smith has a big challenge in front of him, because he took over the team and he and Danny Ainge disassembled a playoff team. And people thought, okay, in their case, and I mentioned this in the column, they didn't have financial flexibility to move it in one direction or the other. But at least they were going to the playoffs every year, and those teams were good. I remember when in 2020-21, that was the best record in the NBA during the regular season. And yeah, okay, so they lost, but at least it was competitive, and it was in the playoffs. And now what's being offered up now? I mean, there have been 2 seasons, you and I have talked about this, where they've sort of been in no man's land. They've been good at times, but they've been bad at times, but not bad enough. And so what does that do? That's like tearing off the Band-Aid one little bit at a time instead of just ripping it right off. And that's what I think the Jazz should have done. If they were going to follow this angle, then do it. Be committed to it and make it happen. And people say, yeah, but how did that work for the 76ers? Sometimes it doesn't work. Remember when the Clippers were the laughing stock? They would have top draft picks, but they would always screw it up one way or the other. Well, be committed to what you're going to do and make it work for you. But what's happened with the Jazz over the last couple of years is they haven't been good, but they haven't been bad enough. And so now, where is the franchise now? Now you see where it is, where they win 3 games out of however many, 17, 18, however many have been played there. And that's, if you're going to do that, then do it with zest and make it happen and make it pay off for you. And with Danny and Ryan, they thought that they were smart enough to make this work. So you give up the playoff team because it's not quite good enough for you. And then there were other things going on. I get that. But now, where are they now? Are they smart enough now that they have the financial flexibility? Are they smart enough to make it work? And I'm not sure they've shown that they are at this point.
And can they find players who want to not just develop here, evolve here, but stay here? I mean, the Jazz historically have the draft and develop portion dialed in, but the formula for building a winning roster with talent in pro basketball is draft, develop, and retain. And it's that third piece they've got to figure out, whether it's Hayward leaving or them deciding to move on from Gobert and Mitchell. So that wasn't necessarily a retain issue, but everyone thought Donovan was gone anyway. So they have the first 2 pieces figured out, Gordon. I think the underlying concern is, in today's day and age of the NBA, with players being able to move a little bit freer than they used to, are the Jazz able to draft, develop, and retain long enough to allow a process to become fully baked? Because John and Carl were in their mid-30s before they went to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I remember looking up when the Jazz were struggling in the playoffs to move forward. I compared Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert teams to what we saw with John and Carl, and it was almost the same, Spence. It was almost the same. But is the team patient enough to stay with it? Are the players satisfied enough to stay with it? Those are big time questions. But now we have an interesting comparison, I think, when you look at the Jazz and then you look at the Utah Hockey Club, and get a freaking name. Well, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, now we can see it'll be interesting to see if hockey players will make Salt Lake City sort of a destination where they really love to play. And how will that compare with NBA players? I'm going to watch that with great interest to see how it turns out, and I don't know the answer to it at this point.
One more thing, Gord, I'll set you loose after this because, as we're talking through this and fleshing some of these topics out, that's why I always like kind of doing radio this way from a standpoint of, kind of diagnosing and not prognosticating and just coming at it from a curiosity standpoint because, if there is this secular nature to the relationship between fans and teams where the team simply is comprised of rich people cheering for each other and you're the peasants that essentially provide the revenue and they don't really give a rip about you, it kind of makes me feel the way that potentially maybe in pro basketball or pro football or what have you, the way that it is with, like EPL soccer teams where it's such a community pillar, regardless of who the owner is, regardless of who the coach is. Like if you were raised in the shadows of White Hart Lane, you are a Tottenham fan. Like wherever your community is, you're just simply a fan of that team and you get together and you watch it and you are a part of the community, regardless of who the people are that are actually running it. They're just stewards of it. And I wonder your thoughts on that, like as far as what sort of community you can create if you're not necessarily thought of as part of the process of building something special. If it really is the deal where like sports have moved into this realm of like all of these rich people because the money is so crazy and they don't really consider the importance of being a community asset. What's it going to take for a fan base simply to create their own community? I will say I feel like that is something different about football, where the football community feels there's like a little religiosity to it. Like there's a little just, they love it so much. And you hear people talk about it with like tears in their eyes. I don't know what it is about football, but ultimately, if it's not going to be about wins and losses, if it's not going to be about, considering what this means to the community and making sure we're building something special, how do fans find their own community and support a team regardless of who's running it or coaching it?
Well, I think winning does come into play in that. But, you talk about football. If you want to talk about football, then think about a place like Liverpool, where you have Liverpool and you have Everton. And how do fans decide which one of those two teams they're going to root for? There's something that clicks that connects them to those teams. And I'm not sure. Maybe I need to call my cultural anthropologist again to find that out. But somehow something clicks and they stay with it. And I think you're right. I see that in the NFL more than I do with some other sports, some other leagues. But sports, these franchises better hope that doesn't evaporate. That's why and I don't know, you've probably talked a lot about this, but, the TV ratings being down in the NBA this year, what causes that? Is that an evaporation of what we're talking about here? Is that fans deciding that, hey, I don't have anything in common with these guys on the floor who are supposed to be representing me, and they're filthy rich, and I'm just trying to keep food on my table for my family? Sports has to find a way to bridge that gap, because if they don't, then I don't think people will pay the prices that they have to pay to be avid fans. Maybe some will, but will it be? What made the NBA so popular, I think, over a couple of decades there, was that it was drawing in the casual fan in addition to the fans who are basketball junkies. And that makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference for the teams and the leagues. And the NBA better not lose that, or else I'm telling you, I don't know how optimistic I would be about that. They've got to find a way to connect. And these, you see some fans or see some players, professional, who connect, who go out of their way to sign autographs, to meet people, to make those connections. And sometimes in the NBA, you see players that just sort of, I got it made regardless of what happens. And that along with gambling, those two things are poison for professional sports. So you got to stay away from them.
Well said. All right, Gord, we blew up the clock, but that makes you proud because you taught me how to do it. So we'll set you loose on this Thursday, and we'll chat soon. Thank you, my friend.
All right, and God bless Bob Uecker. Thank goodness guys like that exist. I'll just leave it that way.
Well said. Well said. Talk about existing in the toy aisle. And we're going to bring in Craig Bolerjack coming up in a little bit. I think, man, we could talk about this topic for so long because the NBA also lucked in a little bit in the 90s, back in that era, where all of those superstar players wanted to rip each other's throats out competitively in a way that you just don't see anymore. Like Magic and Larry and Michael, they wanted to kill you and slit your throat. And Kobe had a little bit of that, right? And as much criticism as Russell Westbrook has taken over the years for simply not being a player where you can win anything special with, he has a little bit of that. The other modern-day guys don't. I mean, there are isolated incidents. It's one of the reasons why I kind of like watching Memphis play, because they kind of want the smoke. I don't know, man. I think it's an interesting time. And, of course, we're coming at it through the prism of trying to cover a local team that isn't serious about winning. We'll see what Bowler has to say. Do a little sports court coming up on the other side. We've got a lot to do on a Thursday right here on ESPN 700. It is Sports Court time. We do it every Thursday right about now with our good friends over at Handy and Handy. Garrett and Preston Handy on a Thursday afternoon. Gentlemen, happy Thursday. How are you?
Hey, Spence. How are you?
Hi, Spence.
Doing well.
All good here. Appreciate you guys being a bit adjustable today. Let's start out with some really bizarre news that happened here in our marketplace as the Montreal Canadiens were in town to take on the Utah Hockey Club, and one of the Canadiens players, unfortunately, was hit by a car while walking in downtown Salt Lake City. What happened here, and what's next?
Yeah, Spence, interesting deal, and we could talk about this forever and ever and educate the listeners out there. But our guy, Montreal Canadian, Emil Heinemann, was in town to play, and about 3 p.m., I believe it was the afternoon before the game, he's walking across the street, and a driver makes a right-hand turn and hits him while in the crosswalk. So we know the facts here, maybe not all the facts, but it sounds like he was hurt, and it's been reported that he had an upper body injury, but now potentially someone says a fractured wrist. And as a result of this, it's reported that he's going to be out 3 to 4 weeks. So as you know, this is the type of case that we handle, and we're going to do a little Michael McCann here and do some hypotheticals because it's pretty recent and we don't know about some of the things. But in every case like this, there are 3 big issues. The first one is liability, meaning is someone legally at fault. And it sounds like this person was at fault. They were making a right-hand turn, wasn't keeping a proper lookout, and hit him in the crosswalk. The next issue is, were there any injuries and damage? Well, first reported that, minor injuries, but now it's reported that he has an arm injury that, guess what? A hockey player needs his arms, and he's going to be out 3 to 4 weeks. So the next question is, what are his real damages? I mean, my suspicion is that he will not lose any income, but let's make a hypothetical that potentially his contract says if something outside of getting hurt in a hockey game, you make a disability claim or potentially you don't get paid your contract. In that case, he would have lost income damages that he could make a claim for. And then the next issue is recoverability. Can you recover against the driver? So this is legally a claim he could pursue if he wanted to, personal injury claim for damages. He will, and it's questionable. I mean, he lives in, Canada, and doing that would be a lot to go out of the way. But I think a couple of interesting facts are it's reported that the person that hit him crossed a couple of lanes, so definitely not paying attention, and was a city employee. And I'll let Garrett jump in on that and tell some of the things about that. But these are things that we deal with all day long, and there's a lot of issues involved.
Go ahead, Garrett.
Well, I think what you're referring to, Preston, I mean, it would depend on if this city employee's on the job or not, right? And so that could make a difference in the claim. I think it's interesting that, also I was going to mention they exchanged information apparently at the scene, and then I think the driver left the scene. Maybe it wasn't clear at that point how serious these injuries were or not, but I think that's an issue. But, I mean, moral of the story on these things, Spence, for everybody out there is it's cars have a hard time, drivers of cars have a really hard time seeing pedestrians, especially at night. We've handled lots of these cases and seen lots of studies on these things. They just don't see them out there, so got to be careful.
Yep, no doubt. All right, moving over to our next story today, the latest, and this has been a complicated entanglement that has been going on for a long time, but there's a new testosterone level that Utah trans girls must meet in order to compete in high school sports. Let's get all the details.
Yeah, there's some new standards in place, and they're really, really high standards. In fact, kind of the criticism here is that it's impossible to meet these standards, and so this is essentially it acts as a total ban on any transgender athletes in high school sports. So these are standards set by the School Activity Eligibility Commission. So when the legislature established this ban, which, and I'll go back and kind of talk about this a little bit, but which is being challenged in court, right? This commission is tasked with setting standards, and so that's what they've done. They, looks like they followed the guidelines in this, but kind of did it pretty quickly without a lot of public input. So in the meantime, in the background, again, what's happening? We had a couple of athletes, transgender girls in the state, file a lawsuit, and that case is moving through the process. Apparently, there's a trial scheduled for April 29th, so I'm sure Spence will be talking about this again here in a few months. So it's because these standards as well, I think they're going to be challenged because it effectively bars transgender athletes from participating to meet the different kind of standards that they're proposing.
All right, Preston, your turn, buddy.
Yeah, so Garrett mentioned the history. I mean, the legislature put in a law. It was a law, and it was a complete ban. Seen as a really heavy-handed one. And so what happened is these athletes came and sued, and they got an injunction from the court, basically saying the state is enjoined from applying that law. And what the state did is they put together the School Activity Eligibility Commission, and I think people that oppose the ban will see this as kind of sneaky, kind of a way around it to all of a sudden put in place some restrictions right now before this thing is adjudicated and maybe goes to trial and see what happens on that. But there's going to be, I think there'll be challenges to this rule because it is seen as pretty stringent, like more stringent than the Olympic stuff and wherever you stand down on this thing. But there'll be some challenges to it, and we'll see what happens with trial here. I think there'll be some constitutional challenges all up through the appeal courts, regardless of what side it comes down on at trial.
When the social media videos started surfacing of visitors to our state to ski, waiting in long lines at Park City and complaining on the videos about their kids waiting for hours and hours and hours, part of me wondered if Vail was going to be, if there were lawsuits and there were people that were mad enough to sue PC Mountain or whatever. I hadn't seen anything until you sent it. So sure enough, one of the visitors to our market to experience the greatest snow on earth was not happy with his experience, and he has filed a class action lawsuit. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Spence, we talked a lot about the strike, and the strike was, basically the facts were the patrollers went on strike right the thick of the holidays when people are coming into town to ski, and that's been resolved. But what hasn't been resolved is a lot of people coming in to ski, they suffered damages. They didn't get the experience they wanted. A big portion of the mountain was shut down, and these crazy lines that I wouldn't even begin to even think of having the patience to stand in. So what's happened is a few skiers, it sounds like there's 3 law firms involved. One of the skiers has hired a law firm, and they filed a lawsuit. And what their lawsuit is basically, they've said that Utah's consumer fraud law, that's what they're relying on. And essentially they're saying, hey, Vail, you knew this problem was going on. It was foreseeable, and you continued selling passes to people that came up there for the experience. There's also probably the claim that, people had their vacation planned and they'd spent thousands. One guy coming from Australia, thousands on, flights and accommodations and, multi-day passes and all of this, and their vacation was essentially ruined. So what we've got now is 2 big things are happening, and the attorneys recognize, he said, this is going to be a big-time procedural fight with Vail's attorneys. The 2 things, they're trying to create a class, and essentially what a class says is that you have enough people who are similarly situated in the situation who want to jump in on the class, and and they'll fight. Vail will fight. They'll say, okay, you one individual, we'll take you on. But if it turns into a class, potentially hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people that want to jump in on this, that's going to be the one fight. And then the other fight that Vail's going to put forth, they're going to say, similar to anytime someone skis and maybe something happens while they're skiing, they're having a good time. They're saying you buy a ski pass, and when you buy that ski pass, you waive any right to sue the resort, any right. You can't. You buy this pass, and it's over. And so, the attorneys have said, we think that consumer fraud is a bigger deal, and we're going to be able to overcome that. But it's going to be a big fight, and we'll be talking about it. We're talking about it because skiing is a recreation sport, and it's an interesting topic on Sports Court.
All right, Garrett, you're up, buddy.
Well, the news out today is just now is that Park City Mountain Resort's offering some credits toward future purchases for people who were there during this time period and had to stand in line. So it's like a 50% credit, and some of them's a 25%. I don't have all the details, but it's applied towards future purchases. And so what this may do is really take the wind out of the sails of the damages that they're trying to put forth, right? Where Park City can now come in and say, hey, we've offered to try to make this right. We've offered these credits, right? You can redeem these things. And what isn't clear to me yet, if there's any sort of exchange going on there where in order to accept those credits, you give up your right maybe to participate in a class action lawsuit. But Park City is hearing the backlash and trying to do something about it, I guess.
All right, moving over to a very bizarre story. The man who is accused of stalking Caitlin Clark goes by the name of Michael Thomas Lewis. Seems like a very unbalanced fellow, to say the least. He has had one day in court. So fill us in. What happened here? What's next for our guy? Well, not our guy, this guy.
Yeah, this guy. Yeah, very unbalanced. 55-year-old guy from Texas, and apparently has been a lot of the messages are through social media, on X, but he's constantly barraging Caitlin Clark with these messages that he's coming to see her around her house, and so she's getting worried, contacts the police, and so they track this guy down. But he traveled from Texas to Indiana, really to stalk her, and so he ends up getting arrested. But I think what's crazy about the story is he shows up for his initial appearance in court, apparently just tells the judge guilty as charged, and he's acting very erratic all over the place, right? He's laughing and joking around, and so it's just kind of a crazy story that we're seeing. I mean, he also said things like, I'm free, I guess you got the wrong guy, and then told the court, I need my medicines. So, yeah, we're dealing with a mentally ill person here, but nonetheless, it caused a lot of fear and consternation for Caitlin Clark.
All right, Preston, your turn to take a shot at this one.
Two things. Why do crazies like this always go by three names? Michael Thomas Lewis.
Good question.
Case closed.
That's a good question, actually. I hadn't considered that. You're not wrong. All right, we got one more today. The Cubbies, Chicago Cubs. They have been sued for this rooftop access situation. Looks like round one goes to the Cubs. What's going on with I think a story that we covered when it first kind of dropped?
Yeah, so the Cubs have sued Wrigley View Rooftop. And the claim is that, hey, you're selling tickets and making money for rooftop seats to watch the game. And we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars over time to license things, pay salaries, to present our product, to sell seats, all of this stuff. And you are poaching on our product, essentially they're saying. And, they want them to stop. And so part of it is they entered into it. This happened back in 2004, and they entered into an agreement with some of these rooftop people. And part of the agreement was, hey, if you're going to do this, you got to pay us 17% of your proceeds. Well, that agreement extended to only the end of 2023. So 23 expires, and guess what? The Cubs are coming at Wrigley View Rooftop, and saying, okay, we don't have an agreement anymore, and you're still doing this. We're going to sue you. So the first thing that Wrigley responded was, well, wait a minute, we're going to sue you. We had an agreement that this should be arbitrated. We talk about this all the time. People want to arbitrate. They don't want things in the courts. And they filed a motion to dismiss, and the judge came back and said, well, first off, your motion to dismiss doesn't hit all the elements need to, so I'm not going to grant that. We're going to continue with this. And the issue of this arbitration thing, we can deal with it a little later time. But I think their response is going to be, we don't have an agreement to arbitrate. We want to see this go through the court process, and maybe it's a trial. Or maybe they'll reach in another agreement. They get bigger piece of the rooftop people's fees and all of that.
All right, Garrett, final word is yours, my friend.
I think it's an interesting case just because I can really see both sides on this. You've got the Cubs, their side. I mean, that makes sense. But, they did build Wrigley Field when in the middle of a dense city where they knew that there were, existing buildings that could potentially see into the field and watch the game. And then I also, it's a case involving private property rights. These people own buildings and have a right to use their property. And, but the issue of selling tickets, that's, I think, where we get into this. But interesting case for sure.
Okay, gentlemen, before we set you loose, for any of our listeners who have legal questions, how can they get a hold of you over at Handy and Handy?
Yeah, we'd love to hear from anyone out there, even Montreal Canadian Emil Heineman.
There we
He can
go.
give us a call, ask us questions. But we'd love to answer any of your questions, especially personal injury cases. Help you out. Give us a call at 801-264-6677 or jump on our website at handylawutah.com.
Okay, gentlemen. Thank you for the time and being adjustable. Meant a lot. Have a great weekend and go Utes. Yep.
Thanks, Spence. Go Utes.
All right. Our good friends, Garrett and Preston Handy. Give them a call if you have any legal questions. Going to bring in Craig Bowlerjack, the voice of the Utah Jazz, coming up on the other side. Bowler's stuck in a little traffic. Jazz are on the road. I think they're in the Big Easy. We have the injury report, like half the team isn't playing. Pro basketball, it's fantastic. Bowler's next, right here on ESPN 700. Get back to little college and pro football in the 5 o'clock hour. Conference round coming up in the NFL. A lot of people feel like this is the best weekend of NFL football and should be a good one. Some of the lines are a little bit big, quite frankly, for this weekend. Vegas thinks we're going to see quite a few upsets, so we'll get back to that coming up in just a little bit. But let's go live to, I believe, the Big Easy, where Craig Bullerjack is standing by with just a grip of beads around his neck. Am I accurate? Are you on? Are you downtown?
Oh, I just got to the hotel. No beads action yet. It's an early night, so who knows? But no, finally got to town. A couple of games with the Pelicans before we head out to OKC, and I'm excited to watch some football too, man. I tell you, the college championship on Monday, and then NFL, man. The NFL action is really intriguing. I'm excited to see how this one turns out.
Do you have a dog left in the fight? Is there a team you would like to see win this thing? Oh, wait, never mind. I forgot. Do you think we're going to see? Yeah, I know. Are we going to see history? Is Andy going to get 3 straight?
The way they've played this year, Spence, as you know, it's been a coin flip. I mean, they've been one of the luckiest, most opportunistic teams of all time, in my opinion. You can't play soft. You can't play soft middle. That second level of defense has always been an issue for me just watching. But Mahomes has a magical touch to him. Andy Reid's hard not to like in what he's been able to do there with Kelsey, Mahomes, and the rest of that offense. They got the Texans. You were talking about lopsided lines out of Vegas. I think that game is last time I looked was 8.5 in favor.
KC -8 right now. Yeah, KC -8.
Yeah, -8. I mean, Arrowhead has a magical feel to it, but the other game that just really intrigues me is Buffalo-Baltimore. Wow, those are 2 good teams on the cusp of being a Super Bowl champion, and one's going to get knocked out, and the other most likely will face Kansas City. But hey, look, in this world, I don't disregard the Texans one bit, honestly. So it's going to be some good football.
What is your favorite weekend? I think a lot of people love the divisional round because you get 2 Saturday, 2 Sunday. I'm a wild card guy only because there simply is more football. But what's your favorite pro football playoff weekend?
Yeah, I like the wild cards, but I'm looking forward to this one. We got a game, but I'll still be able to catch some action this weekend. So that's good. We play also on Monday night, national championship night, but I'll find a way to sneak a peek on occasion. But it's fun. I mean, it's amazing how all these sports overlap, Spence. Oh my gosh, you got college national championship, and then after the playoffs, we got the Super Bowl and the AFC, NFC title games, and then the Super Bowl is to come. So before you know it, March Madness will start to really rev up, which is kind of sad because in a way, college basketball has been, on the floor since late October, early November, but there hasn't been a lot of attention put to it yet, but it'll rev up.
You think Baltimore or Buffalo keeps Andy up at night more?
I'm afraid of Baltimore's speed, to be totally honest, for the Chiefs. For Buffalo, if I had to pick a winner in that game, I think Baltimore could win. Buffalo may be the easier get against Kansas City, but Josh Allen and the guys, they play great. That game will really knock out a real favorite for me because I think they're both highly talented, good quarterbacks, good defense, and the speed of Baltimore is exceptional.
Yeah, and it will be because that Baltimore-Buffalo game, I mean, geez, that's going to be a heavyweight fight. And Baltimore's actually favored, even though they're on the road. So 4 games coming up, 2 Saturday, 2 Sunday. So really, really exciting. All right, Bowler, last night kind of continued the theme of what the Jazz have been as of late. And I would say clearly improving and playing more competitively, regardless of who's on the floor. You wouldn't know that if you just looked at the standings or the scores. But what are you seeing most? What are you seeing that indicates most that they actually are headed in the right direction, even on nights where they can't get it done late like they couldn't last night against the Hornets?
Spence, I think guard play was the biggest concern when the season started. And, Keontae comes back after missing 5 and had 26 and 6 assists. Will still had some issues with some of his decision-making. and I get it. Isaiah Collier has turned my head some, to be totally honest. I mean, he seems to be getting his footing and understand what the NBA is and how you share the ball, but he goes 11 and 10. I mean, come on, that's a far cry of what he was doing just about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 10 games ago, but he's also gotten more minutes, which has helped his development. You know, this is a constant merry-go-round for me. I mean, I believe the Jazz spent top 5 in the league in different starting five, their starting lineups. And every night I just wait to see who's in, who's out, and who's going to be on the floor as a starter. One night it's Micah Potter, and then one night you get, Isaiah. Another night you get V. Another night you get Sensabaugh. So the one thing the Jazz are doing is giving these young players multiple opportunities with multiple different players, so Danny and Justin can actually say, look, who are they? Who do they play well with? Who complements whom? And I think, again, those data points we talked about, Spence, a couple of months ago, they're kind of coming into play now. Danny and Justin said, look, we need some information. I think they're getting it. And they are playing more competitively. And probably the one thing that jumped out at me last night, only 8 points off 12 turnovers. That has been the biggest issue for this young team all year long, is to let teams just run them over in transition. And I thought last night they played a little better D. They had 30 assists. They seem to be sharing the ball better, and they seem to be just kind of synced in. But you have to give Will some credit here, because he's been able to play 10 to 11 guys per night who don't know each other that well, but they seem to be finding a way.
So you referenced Collier. Let's dig in for a moment, because the more and more I watch him, and this is a kid who was the McDonald's All-American MVP. He was the McDonald's MVP. The MVP of that game, I mean, you look at that list, that's a special group and highly sought of coming out of high school. And one of those, it was like Michael Porter Jr. coming out of high school. This kid would have been the number 1 pick, goes to Mizzou, gets hurt, ends up falling. Nuggets grab him. He's never turned into that guy. And Isaiah didn't get hurt, but that 1 year at SC hurt his stock. But the more and more you watch him, he has lead guard tendencies that I don't think anyone else on the roster has, maybe outside of Patty Mills. But Patty, bless his heart, he's not part of the future plans. He has lead guard tendencies that Keontae just doesn't. Now, you can learn that, and certainly over time we've seen players understand what it takes to be more of a point guard, initiator, lead guard. I know Will doesn't love the labels, but there's something about Isaiah that makes him a little bit different from a decision-making standpoint, and it's still inconsistent because he's a kid. But do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's just a little bit different with him than it is with, like, Keontae or some of the other young players.
Spence, I think it trickles down all the way to when he started playing basketball. He's been a point guard from day one. And so I think that's translated now to who he is in the NBA. He only had the 1 year stop at USC, the Bronny James, I think, combination. Yeah, I can't imagine trying to play in that particular surrounding. Never, if you thought LeBron was going to walk in the door, if the media was always hounding, the Trojans at every turn because of James. But I think he's settled in. I think he's very strong. We saw him get cartwheeled down to the floor, go in for a concussion protocol check, come back, and then score the winner the other night against Brooklyn. And then last night he goes, 11 and 10. I think his decision making's much improved. He seems real confident, and he has a little Jalen Brunson kind of body size to him, where he can bang inside. He's not fearful to go into the lane, the paint. And he's rough. He's a tough guy, man. He's built like an outside backer or a strong safety, and he doesn't, back away from that type of physicality. So, yeah, I think they got to take a real good look at him, and I think he's making it more difficult. And if I'm Keontae, I would probably say I don't want to leave the floor much right now, because I think there's really good competition between those two.
Tell me, in your experiences, what kind of kid is he? Because he just hasn't been front facing as far as Jazz players who they send out there in the community. It's more of their star players. And so I've listened to some post game stuff, but I don't know at all. What kind of kid is Isaiah Collier?
I think he's kind of that quiet assassin approach. He's not really that, let's say, looking for the camera or notoriety. I think he likes to let his game speak for itself. I think we get caught up too with a lot of guys who are more vocal, kind of the alpha. I think he's an alpha on the floor. Off the floor, he still, I think, doesn't feel as comfortable probably as a rookie to show his true self, with personality. That's probably going to pop out as time goes on. But the times I've talked to him, he's focused. He loves the game. He understands the game, and I'm excited for him. I think it's a good find. A late first rounder. And, again, you got to get lucky, Spence, as you and I talked about. You got to get lucky on occasion. Filipowski was an early second round. This is a late first round. And you got to hit once in a while. And those two guys with Flip, there's still work to do, but they may have hit on both those guys.
All right. When Walker struggles the way he did, last night in the fourth, I mean, like I said, the Jazz were kind of on their way to potentially getting a win. The Hornets are not a good team this year. They're kind of in the same space the Jazz are. If we could have a conversation about, whether or not Charlotte has something with LaMelo that the Jazz don't with Lowry as far as tiers and levels of stars or what have you. But, Mark Williams is a fine player. He was okay at Duke. I think he was a sixth man. Yeah, and he goes for 31 and 13 career highs. And there was just something in the fourth quarter about Walker that I think was a little less than what we've become accustomed to this year. Is that just one game throwaway, or did you see something that was concerning a little bit?
I think Williams got more downhill on Walker. He lost position. That's from my chair. I think Walker got a little, for the first time in a while after coming back from a rest game. I thought he started strong, but I think he started to hit a little doubt crept in because Mark Williams is a physical big dude and really took it inside. They had a lot of offensive rebounds and second chance points, opportunities, that is. And Walker I thought Big T and I talked, he kind of got out of position, got sideways, I think, a couple of times. And then, of course, he misses some free throws, and that's kind of where that tumble effect kind of takes place for a Walker Kessler or any young guy in the league. But yeah, you hope it's a one and done kind of thing because he's been playing incredibly high level of late, especially rebounding, leading top 2 or 3 in the league in offensive rebounds. And I thought he's done a yeoman's job of late. But last night, Williams' strength just seemed to overwhelm him. In that fourth quarter, Spence, you're spot on. They got outscored by a dozen. And again, we've watched leads slip away. This is another case last night. Look, fans, and let's be honest, we all know the score. Play hard, get experience, and if the wins don't come, that's fine. And this is what intrigues me about what happens here in New Orleans because both these teams – with the Jazz and the Pelicans are right in the same boat, right? With Zion sitting around, I don't know what his future is going to be, but you got the number 14 and 15 teams in the West. They're going to play 2 straight games here in New Orleans. I'm anxious to see how this one turns out. If one takes one and one night, and the other one takes the other one, and they play even. But it's going to be interesting to see who actually gets on the floor and plays.
Well, yes, and speaking of that, before we move on to some other things, we do have the injury report for the Jazz. So no Lowry Markkanen, no Johnny Juzang, no Micah Potter, no John Collins, no Jordan Clarkson. So those 5 players out. And obviously that makes it challenging if you're Will. It makes it challenging if you're a broadcaster, and it makes it challenging if you're a fan. But did you have a chance, Craig, to see what your old buddy Gordon Monson wrote today in the Salt Lake Tribune?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I read that on the plane down here about what Delta Center's haunted, right? It's ghost filled because of wins of past and losing of late. How do you say that? Wins in the past and now losing at the Delta Center. Yeah, ghosts are floating around the house that Larry built.
Well, while I'm not ready to delve into the supernatural and understand whether or not, Casper's jumping out of the walls, Gordon, as he typically does, makes some really good points. But here's what I wanted to ask you, because, when we had Gordon on earlier, and we were he asked me, what sporting events have I attended because our whole debate earlier was what's the difference between a sporting event and a play and a movie. Like what are the main lines of delineation? What makes it different? What's the passion, the competition? And I don't know that I've been to a lot of buildings, a lot of events, Super Bowls, NBA Finals, Final Fours. I'm not sure that I've ever experienced or heard anything than the NBA Finals in 97 or 98 here in Salt Lake when the Bulls were in town. And we have the honor of being the host city of the highest rated pro basketball game in the history of of the NBA, and that's the final game Michael Jordan played here in Salt Lake. And I don't think that record is ever going to be broken. I guess only time will tell. Does the sound in the building hit different because the fans are still there? And this brings into a societal conversation about what fans want ultimately. And I do think there is a level of fan that's just like, I just kind of want to go to the game. I'm not really going to listen to people talk about them. I don't give a rip about media. My neighbor just said he has 2 Jazz tickets. So sweet. I'm going to take my son. We're going to escape life. And I don't think, ultimately they care a ton about what they're seeing. They just want to escape their world for a little bit. And then there's the sports fan that is passionate, part of the community. And sometimes sports communities can feel very similar to some religiosity or some politics because folks just want to belong to something. They want to be part of something. They want to be in the community. And then there are the diehards. They're like, well, if you're not winning, not trying to win, I'm just not going to be engaged. But whenever I go down there, the seats more or less are full. How does the sound and the fan base hit differently during a season when they're unserious about winning as opposed to when they were winning at a high level almost every single night?
Yeah, Spence, I don't know how many games Gordo's been to, but for me, I have been stunned that the support remains high. And the chairs that you just said are nearly filled, if not full, every night. Good crowd last night, good crowd against Brooklyn, 2 teams that really aren't the high-tiered type of teams that come out of the East. But still, I think you're spot on about, look, I got 2 tickets, let's roll. Let's go enjoy the experience. And I think the Jazz have done a nice job giving fans that experience. Some people get a chance to hit the Toyota Club. Others like the upper deck because it's affordable or at least semi-affordable. They can drink beer if they want. They got all the things for the kids if they want to knock down the popcorn and all that. But, then there are the diehard fans. But I think they're dialed in. But how long is the question here? They understand the goal, but what is the length of time to reach it? The window that Justin and Danny speak of about opening a new window, a long-term window of winning, while the rest of the West begins to age out. So it's intriguing in that regard. But look, Stockton and Malone, when we covered them, they're special. And that's why there's 2 statues out front of the building, right? Hot Rod, God love him, Stockton and Malone, Stockton and Malone, Stockton and Malone. How many times did he utter those 2 words or Stockton to Malone? So he coined that phrase because of the 2 great players in the Hall of Famers to be. And I think that is what still is remembered, the echoes of that and the play of John and Carl with Hornacek and Coach Sloan pacing the sideline, stomping his feet. But, I still think the energy's there. Look, the players have all aged and moved on. Jerry has passed and Larry's gone. But I feel from my chair here in my 20th year, that building still has something. That building still has a special meaning for a lot of fans, and I don't think they're ready to give it up. That's just from my chair. But I've been impressed with the way that they have followed this team, and I believe they're still trying to hook themselves to a player, Spence, that they could with Hornacek, and they did with Memo, and they did with Malone and John. And I still think, when you lose players quicker, maybe sometimes now than it used to be, because you don't get Carl and John to stick around probably again. If you had to replay their careers, they'd probably be tempted to move on someplace else. But the Jazz were blessed that they played their career here, except for Carl, who made the quick jump to L.A. But I think the fans still want to have a couple of players that they can really hang their hat on and be a part of. And that's developing as we speak. And I think they're just waiting to see who really jumps out and takes control of this franchise. Maybe he's not here yet.
Yeah. It's funny, Craig, as you're talking, I'm just simply thinking about how, and I put myself in this category, we all just do such a horrible job of acknowledging when something's really cool in the moment right in front of us because we believe it's going to happen again. And I'm not saying it's never going to happen again, right? But it's a time like this, if I could quote the Foo Fighters, shout out Dave Grohl. It's a time like this where, we're this is year 3 of a rebuild. And if we're honest, which I try to be on the show, I try to balance honesty with fairness and mostly approach it with curiosity and trying to diagnose instead of predict because it's impossible. But if we're honest, this is not a team that's 1 year away. It's not a team that's 2 years away, barring something insane that I don't see coming at all. And so I think when you're in the midst of what could be a 5, 6, 7-year plan, it's only natural to look back and be like, man, I wish I appreciated John and Carl more, or Devin, or D. Will and Booze, or Donovan and Gobert, as opposed to, believing things should be better when they're really, really good. I don't think there's anything wrong with acknowledging with what's in front of you is pretty damn good. And I think times like these probably remind Jazz fans of that.
Yeah, no, I think Gordon's article, his point was that it's not what it was, and will it be again? And, it's hard to predict that. But I still hear the echoes of those days. That building still stands strong, and they've remanufactured it several times, and it's going to get another facelift in the next couple of years to accommodate hockey too, Spence, as you know. And it's going to be interesting that building continues to kind of just give back to the community, and downtown's going to grow around it. And that's probably going to be an exciting part of this rebuild as well. But who comes along for the ride? That's the question. And all you can do is just kind of go with it and see who, Will Hardy said to me a couple of times, this isn't an easy business, and we all know that. But, for him to say it, that some players we will not see, some players will be here, some will not. That's just the brutality of putting a roster together. And as they continue to decide who fits and who doesn't, and how Danny wants to use his draft capital is unbelievable. And where do the Jazz finish, and how lucky do they get, Spence, actually in the lottery? What was Atlanta, 10 last year, and they actually got the 1 pick. The Jazz were 8 and got the 10 pick. So you have to have some luck along the way. And, boy, I think the Jazz I think they're in line to have a little luck come their way in the lottery for sure.
No, there's no doubt. Excuse me, Craig. All right, before I set you loose, I'll ask you to chime in on the question that we debated. What do you think, as a man that is refined, a Renaissance man who enjoys the arts and enjoys plays and great films? I know you call them films because you're pretentious like that, but what's the difference between a game and a play, a sporting match and a movie? What's the difference?
Is this what Gordon was discussing with you earlier? I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't know if he had 7 apple beers before he hopped on, but this is where we went.
Boy, I tell you, man, his apple beer consumption is a little interesting after last week's studio run there.
There's no doubt.
A play can be either dramatic or a comic play, right? So there's comedic acting or then very drama. I mean, it kind of reflects life a little bit. Does a game have that? There's some laughter at times. Look, I try to be refined, but let's call it what it is. I'm a sports guy who loves live events and sports and calling games. The plays I can sit through, but I have to have speaking parts. I went to Cats years ago, and I asked my wife, when do they start to talk in, verbiage? And no, honey, they don't. It's all singing. And I thought, whoa, this is going to be a long night. So I'm sure some fans feel that same way, Spence, when they're watching a Jazz game where maybe they get beat on a 26-2 run. They want to walk out. So, I mean, maybe they both have some relationship. What did you guys decide? I mean, it's an interesting question, actually.
Well, I think what makes sports different, what makes it stand out, because there really are a ton of parallels, right? I mean, there are. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the consumer is looking to be entertained. And as we discussed earlier, depending on your level of fandom, maybe you're only looking to escape for 2 hours. Maybe your job sucks. Maybe your relationship is in peril. Your kids hate you, and you just want to watch a damn game, right? And maybe that's it.
Right.
And for a couple of that's all, right? It depends on your level of fandom. But what I've never found in a play or a movie, and due respect, Cat sucks. That's the wrong one to see, Bowler. That's a horrible.
Yeah, that one kind of pushed me off the edge there, to be honest.
Yeah, I may never see it play again if that's the one I saw. But what you don't get is the flair for the dramatic at the end and the passionate energy of competition when there is a winner or a loser. And at times there are in film and in a play, but that's not real. Sports is the ultimate of reality television, and we watch for those moments that we don't see coming. The game winners, the young player that figures it out, the upset team, the upstart team, the dynasty and the Chiefs that keep figuring it out. Like all of the things that we can't predict that actually manifest themselves. To me, that's what sets sports apart.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the unveiling of the moment. in plays, you hear how it ends. You know it. Most likely it may have come from a book, the written word, and then all of a sudden it comes to life. But you know the ending. I think that's the addiction for all of us who follow sports and call games, and you never know what's going to happen on your 4-hour-a-day show. You never know what someone's going to say or what is going to be the top story to light up, the text lines or the interests of the listeners. And that's why I think I still love this business so much, is because there's no script. You just never know how it's going to turn out. Didn't expect Isaiah Collier to do a cartwheel, run back, get an x-ray, or have himself looked at to say, okay, man, you're not concussed. And then you come back and drive in for the winning score. I think that's what drives it all. I really do. That's a difference for me. I'm with you 100% on that.
Bowler, last thing.
Unknown. It's the unknown.
Yes, exactly. I don't know if you ever met Bob Uecker, but if you're in this business, I mean, my goodness, I was introduced to him, and I still pull this clip up to this day because his timing and comedic value was so good in Major League, and I can't say it on air, but when he's doing the radio broadcast and he sees the box score, he's like, that's all we got? One bleep it, what he said, one hit. He's like, you can't say that on the radio. He's like, who cares? I did it anyway. Yeah. So I didn't know him when I was younger, but obviously he's a titan in our business, and he passes away today. I wonder what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I was sad. I've never met the man, but I've listened to him, and then I'm with you on Major League. He turned baseball, sports movies kind of upside down. His comedic timing was perfect. His analysts never said a word, mind you. And the one line that I always remember is, just a bit outside. And you know that it went about 1.5 feet off the plate, right? But, yeah, he was just – his timing was impeccable. And there was a lot of respect, a lot of sad people on the way, him passing, but they're going to miss him. He was an iconic figure in the community, and man, he called some good games. He was a natural, but also had a very funny side to him that it allowed people to get to know. And you know what? God bless him. 90 years, he won the lottery. That's for sure.
No doubt. All right, Craig, thanks for the time, man. Have a great call and travel safe.
All right, my friend. Thanks. Talk soon.
Greg Bowler-Jack, the voice of the Utah Jazz. Jazz lost a tough one to the Hornets last night after collapsing in the fourth quarter. The Jazz are now going to take on the Pelicans coming up tomorrow without the following players. As we have just as my page refreshes, the injury report, the Jazz will be without Lauri Markkanen, Johnny Juzang, Micah Potter, John Collins, and Jordan Clarkson. So Pelicans will be without Brandon Ingram and Herb Jones. DeJounte Murray is questionable, but it looks like Zion Williamson will play. Future Jazz man, if you're a friend of the show. All right, we'll catch a break. 5 o'clock hour comes your way next on a Thursday right here on ESPN 700. All right, what's going on? Drive at 5 time on this Thursday afternoon/evening. It's been kind of an unseasonably warm day. We got up to about 40, 42 degrees. The sun was shining here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah, as the sun is now setting as we move into the 5 o'clock hour of the program. And we got some cold temperatures coming our way this weekend. But a pretty nice day on the way tomorrow as well. But as it is every day, it's good to have you along for the ride. 5 o'clock hour of the program today includes the offensive coordinator for Utah football, Jason Beck, in about 15 minutes from right now. And then we've got the best of on the station today, followed by the Rockets and the Kings, little NBA basketball on your radio station tonight. The 5 o'clock hour of the show today is brought to you by Prize Picks. It is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app, giving away free money to see if you like it. So just take that, try it, and then go from there. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download that Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. So we've had a really, really busy show. Jazz were unable to get the win last night. Utah men's basketball gets their second straight Big 12 victory, this time on the road against Texas Christian in Fort Worth. They're going to come home to take on Brigham Young on Saturday night at 7 o'clock. A game that a couple of weeks ago looked like a mismatch on paper. BYU, as far as the line goes, will certainly be favored to win this game, but Utah comes into the game with a little bit of momentum. Brigham Young figured some things out the other night and made a bunch of shots. Kevin Young made some adjustments to his rotation. Oklahoma State probably does not want to come into the state of Utah anymore, as the Utes smoked them, then the Cougars did, and now we'll see what happens Saturday night. So it is a red out for those of you that did not know that. Go grab your red, head up to the Huntsman Center, and enjoy what should be a good game. Get to head up there and enjoy it myself. We are one day closer to the divisional round in pro football. A lot of people excited for that. We got 2 games Saturday, 2 games Sunday. But there was some news that broke earlier that kind of slid under the radar a little bit, and I wanted to kind of unpack it. So we've talked about this, but the impact of the U.S. Department of Education and ultimately some of their rulings on the future of college athletics, we've been waiting for some final word on these. So today we did get a memo from the Department of Education which classifies future revenue distributions from a school to an athlete for his/her NIL rights as, quote, financial assistance. Why is that important? Well, it now must be made proportionally available to male and female athletes, or you risk violating Title IX. So this just came down. Didn't happen all that long ago, but it is a big deal. And, you know, ultimately, if we dig through a couple of these things with the time that we have now, it is a memo and now provides some guidance, which college athletics has been waiting for a long time, about how gender equity laws will apply to this new era of college sports that begins in just a couple of months. You know, June, July is when we're moving into this. So the NCAA has agreed, as you guys know, to allow each school to share up to $20.5 million in direct payments to its athletes via name, image, and likeness, as one of the terms of a pending antitrust settlement, which we are still waiting for. This is not that. It's different. And so we've heard in some cases athletic directors publicly share that they intend to provide 75 to 80% of the money they're allowed to pay their athletes on football players. Because, of course, that's the sport that generates the revenue. If we can be grown-ups and talk about it, that's just kind of the deal. But today, just about 20, 30 minutes ago, the Office for Civil Rights, the division of the Department of Education that enforces the Title IX law, said in its memo that the future payments should be considered what's called athletic financial assistance, and therefore they must be shared proportionally between men and women athletes. Couple of things here before we break. Quote, when a school provides athletic financial assistance in forms of other than scholarships or grants, including compensation for the use of student-athlete NIL, such assistance also must be made proportionally available to male and female athletes. course, Title IX federal law that prohibits sex-based discrimination in education programs. The law requires that the schools provide opportunities to play a varsity sports that are proportional to the student body's overall gender makeup. It also requires schools to provide financial assistance that is in proportion to the number of students of each sex who play sports on campus. So if 50% of a school's athletes are women, then 50% of the school's financial aid for athletes must be allotted to women. So this is just coming down. Now, one of the things that could change this is the upcoming Donald Trump is about to take over as president once again. And will his administration install new officials in the near future? And then those officials roll these things back. So Ross Dellinger, a guest on the show, this was in November, prior to the election, wrote a piece called Why This Could Be the Most Consequential Election in College Sports History. And instead of unpacking that, I'll send you to Ross's piece. And he talks about, this is the first of a bunch of dominoes that we have been waiting to fall to try to understand what administrators have to traverse in order to follow rules. And as I referenced, right now, this Title IX ruling is official via the Department of Education. But Donald Trump, once he takes over, does he install new leadership? And that leadership rolls this back. Ross explains why that's absolutely a possibility. But as of now, today, this is a really big deal. So we'll get to more of it, of course, throughout the course of the week. But let's catch a break to bring in Jason Beck, the new offensive coordinator of the University of Utah, on the other side right here on ESPN 700. All right, as I referenced earlier, a big piece of news today came down, and it was later in the show, so we'll probably cover a little bit more tomorrow and throughout the week. It is a big deal. It's a big thing we've been waiting for quite some time. The Office for Civil Rights and the Division of the Department of Education, both that enforce the law that is Title IX, said in a memo today that future payments should be considered what's called athletic financial assistance, and therefore must be shared proportionally between men and women's athletes. To give you the simplest of examples, if 50% of a school's athletes are women, then 50% of the school's financial aid for athletes must be allotted to women. What is not as clear, and this is drinking from a fire hose, man. I'm reading this document as we speak, is what payments from booster collectives will be asked to do, okay? So payments from booster collectives closely associated with the schools are impacted by Title IX laws. It states that the department does not consider money provided by a third party in an NIL deal as athletic financial assistance. So like the future revenue sharing payments or scholarship dollars. But if money from private sources end up creating a large disparity in an athletic program, it is possible that NIL agreements could, quote, trigger a school's Title IX obligations. So if schools try to circumvent the ruling via a third party, whether it's a company or a booster, to get more money into their football players' pockets or basketball players' pockets, clearly the Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights will be keeping an eye on things like that. As I referenced earlier, according to people that are a lot smarter than I am, there is a potential possibility this is rolled back when Donald Trump takes office. Does he put new leadership into the Department of Education? Do they roll this back and try to figure out something else? Who knows? But we have been waiting for this news that came down today, and it dropped a little bit earlier. Porter, any thoughts on this chaos? I mean, again, drinking through a fire hose, we're just learning about it.
I was going to say, like you said, drinking through a fire hose is a lot of information, and I'll have to actually go read some of the proposals and get through the entirety of them to get a good understanding. But it seems like a lot more confusion and a little bit more clarification, right? So baby steps, I guess. But when you are kind of allowing that third-party gray area, it seems like we're still in that space. I don't know how you necessarily step out of there cleanly, but this is at least giving us a roadmap to what may be the path to a little bit of normalcy. But like you said, there is a completely new Department of Education coming in within the next couple of weeks, and those specific people have specifically talked about changing what's going on with this process. So expected to change this summer. Again, that's kind of where I'm at and kind of where you should expect to be.
Yeah, we've been waiting for news on essentially three different fronts from 30,000 feet, right? Number one, comprehensive congressional college sports legislation. As I referenced earlier, that's still the process is still playing itself out. Number two, we found out today the interpretation and enforcement of Title IX as it relates to athlete revenue sharing. Number three, simply the debate over college athletes as employees, which for now has been put on hold prior to this new administration. All right, well, that was a lot to take in, as we were saying goodnight, Porter. What comes our way on a Friday edition of the radio show?
On a Friday show of The Drive, Tony Jones stops by the program. We'll talk some Jazz and NBA basketball with TJ, maybe some football with him as well. Ben Solak talking some NFL, of course, ESPN's NFL Insider. We'll chat with Sean Mooney as Utah and BYU go to battle on the hardwood over the weekend. Maybe Max Brown, maybe Amy Donaldson, and we'll finish off the week with our friend Kyle Bonagura talking some MLS and, of course, college football ahead of the national title game.
Good stuff. So join us for a Friday edition of the program. Don't forget Utah BYU men's basketball coming up on Saturday at the Huntsman Center. So get tickets and wear red. The Utah women are in action tomorrow at TCU. So stay tuned for that. Jazz off tonight. They're in action tomorrow against New Orleans. The Utah Hockey Club plays the New York Rangers tonight, which is wild. So a lot of local sports action tonight throughout the course of the next 24 hours. And we'll say goodnight. And a special thank you to Jason Beck, Chris Comrani, Gordon Monson, and Craig Bowlerjack. For any of the sound you may have missed from the show, head on over to the website, which is ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app and take us on the go. ESPN 700 app available for free in the App Store or the Google Play Store. And then for what we do in our space every day, 4 hours, check out any part of it you want on our podcast page. Then you're in charge. Listen to the portion you want to listen to on your time. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. Beautiful thing about digital consumption. While you're there, give us a rating, review, follow along, say nice things in the comments. Give us all the stars. It helps. He's Porter. I'm Spence saying goodnight. Have a great Thursday evening. Talk to you on a Friday Drive. As always, you can find it right here on ESPN 700.